إعلان مهم.
重要提示
Important announcement.
Message important.
Важное объявление.
Annuncio importante.
يرجى من المتحدثين الكرام إلقاء بياناتهم بسرعة معقولة لضمان ترجمة فورية وافية وعالية الجودة.
为了帮助口译准确完整传递发言信息，请代表发言时语速不要过快。
Speakers are kindly reminded to deliver their statements at a reasonable pace to ensure complete and quality interpretation.
Il est rappelé aux orateurs qu'ils doivent présenter leur déclaration à un rythme raisonnable afin de garantir une interprétation complète et de qualité.
Напоминаем ораторам, что для того, чтобы устный перевод был полным и качественным, необходимо выступать в умеренном темпе.
Se ruega a los oradores que pronuncien sus declaraciones a un ritmo razonable para garantizar una interpretación íntegra y de calidad.
Excelencias,
Excellencies, High Commissioner, distinguished colleagues, a good afternoon to all. I call toward the 39th special session of the Human Rights Council. As announced in the consultations opened yesterday, on Monday, 19th of January, the President of the Council received a request to hold a special session to address the deteriorating human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran, presented under paragraph 121 of the Annex to Resolution 5.1 of the Council. The joint request contained in a letter from the permanent representatives of Germany, Iceland, North Macedonia, Moldova, and the UK was supported by 21 member states of the Council and 30 observer states. The request to hold a special session and the list of members and observers supporting it was communicated by note verbal to all members and observers of the Council. To date, the Marshall Islands have also expressed support to the holding of the special session. The online registration system for the speakers list was open from Wednesday, 21st January at 2 p.m. until Friday, 23rd January at 12 midday. In order to allow full and precise interpretation of your statements, all delegates are requested to speak at a reasonable speed. I take the opportunity to request the support of all to ensure that this special session is carried out with efficiency and dignity. I thank the Office of the United Nations at Geneva for providing the necessary conference services to hold this special session in keeping with Resolution 5.1 of the Council, the institution building package. We hope that we may continue to have its support throughout the year. I call on all delegates to keep strictly to the speaking time. We have a lengthy list, and we need to be aware of this. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, I have the honor to give the floor to Mr. Volker Turk, High Commissioner for Human Rights, to make his statement. You have the floor, High Commissioner.
Senor Vicepresidente,
Vice President, I think.
Distinguished delegates, the killing on the streets of Iran may have subsided, but the brutality continues. The violent repression of the Iranian people does not solve any of the country's problems. On the contrary, it creates conditions for further human rights violations, instability and bloodshed. Thousands of people, including children, were killed in the course of a security crackdown that intensified on 8 January with the use of live ammunition by the security forces against demonstrators. More specific facts are difficult to verify because of the communication shutdown that was also initiated on 8 January and because we do not have access to Iran. Peaceful protesters were reportedly killed in the streets and in residential areas, including universities and medical facilities. Video evidence appears to show hundreds of bodies in morgues with fatal injuries to the head and chest. Hundreds of security personnel were reportedly also killed. We have indications that the security forces made mass arrests in several cities, even pursuing injured people into hospitals and detaining lawyers, human rights defenders, activists and ordinary civilians. The Tehran prosecutor's office has reportedly opened criminal cases against athletes, actors, people involved in the movie industry and the owners of cafes on charges of supporting the protests. And in a chilling development, the chief of the judiciary said earlier this week that their work had just started and there would be no leniency for those detained. Worryingly, Iran remains among the top executioner states in the world. In 2025, at least 1,500 people were reportedly executed, a 50% increase on the previous year. I'm deeply concerned by contradictory statements from the Iranian authorities about whether those detained in connection with the protests may be executed. While the foreign minister said executions were not under consideration, senior judicial officials continued to threaten protesters with charges that carry a mandatory death sentence. The broadcast by state media of nearly 100 forced confessions by those detained and a lack of transparency around proceedings raise grave concerns over the rights to due process and fair trial. Reports indicate that detainees are unable to communicate with their families or legal representatives due to the communications and internet shutdowns. This shutdown, the longest recorded in Iran, has severely restricted access to information and communication. Iranians have been unable to speak to each other or to people outside the country and unable to find out what is happening around them. The Iranian authorities have sought to delegitimize the protesters by labeling them terrorists, enemies of the state and foreign agents. They accused rioters of infiltrating peaceful protests to attack security officers and public property. None of this would justify the resort to excessive, unnecessary and disproportionate use of force or reduce the government's obligations to ensure due process and transparent investigations. Distinguished delegates, these protests are the latest in a long line of heartfelt calls by the Iranian people for change. And the crackdown is the latest in a long line of violent repression by the Iranian authorities, most recently in 2022, following the death in custody of Gina Mahsa Amini. This council mandated the fact-finding mission on Iran after that convulsion of violence. The recent protests were sparked by soaring prices against the backdrop of a serious economic crisis compounded by government policies and the impact of foreign sanctions. They then evolved into sustained demands for political, social and economic reforms. The authorities initially responded with a call for dialogue and announced the doubling of a state subsidy to mitigate rising prices. Tragically, this quickly gave way to the old pattern of killings and arrests, a pattern of subjugation and overwhelming force that can never address people's grievances and frustrations. The only way out of this frightening escalation is through dialogue based on the human rights of all Iranians. The aspirations and ideas, in particular of women, girls, young people, and ethnic and religious minorities, must be allowed to shape Iran's future. We remain available to support any change in direction that fully respects Iran's human rights obligations. Distinguished delegates, I have 7 messages for the top leadership in Iran. They are intended as an appeal to find a solution to the current crisis and as a way forward for the people of Iran. I call on the Iranian authorities to reconsider, to pull back, and to end their brutal repression, including summary trials and disproportionate sentences. I call for the immediate release of all those arbitrarily detained by the Iranian authorities. And I call for a complete moratorium on the death penalty. I urge the government to end the internet and communications shutdown and to stop using this as a systematic practice. I call for accountability. Long-standing impunity for past human rights violations is fueling grievance and tension in Iran. I therefore urge independent investigations into all human rights violations consistent with international standards. And I call on the authorities to initiate reforms that include steps to rebuild trust and repair the social contract. I also urge them to engage with the international human rights ecosystem by cooperating meaningfully with my office, with the independent international fact-finding mission and the Special Rapporteur. This includes allowing full access to the country. Beyond Iran, I urge the international community to take immediate steps to address the impact of sanctions on the human rights of the Iranian people. Aggressive rhetoric and threats are deeply counterproductive. Accountability for human rights violations cannot be achieved by military force coming from inside or outside Iran. It is imperative to reduce tensions across the region. Human rights are an essential tool to navigate through difficult issues and troubled times, not a weapon to be instrumentalized against anyone. My most fervent wish is for this crisis to become a turning point for change that puts the rights, aspirations, and needs of the Iranian people first. Thank you.
Gracias, señor Alto Comisionado.
Thank you, High Commissioner. I now wish to give the floor to Maysato, Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran and on behalf of the Coordination Committee of Special Procedures. You have the floor.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates and representative of civil society, it is my honor to address you today on behalf of the Coordination Committee of the Special Procedures and on behalf of my mandate. On December 28th, severe economic hardship ignited demonstrations across Iran that became a nationwide movement spanning all regions, with men, women from diverse ethnic and religious groups demanding political change. What distinguishes democratic governance from authoritarian rule is that people can exercise their right to peacefully demand change, and authorities must engage with these demands rather than to suppress them. The situation deteriorated dramatically on the 8th of January. On this day, authorities implemented a near-total telecommunications shutdown. The ongoing internet shutdown prevents international witnessing of atrocities while disrupting peaceful protest coordination. This digital siege has caused immense anguish for families inside and outside of Iran, unable to confirm their loved ones' safety. The death toll remains contested due to the shutdown, enabling the state to control information flow. Authorities have reported over 3,000 deaths, including security forces, while some civil society estimates go up to tens of thousands, though neither of these figures can be independently verified. The staggering discrepancy demonstrates how the shutdown has obscured the true scale of events. I've also received disturbing reports of authorities coercing families to falsely claim deceased relatives were Basij members allegedly killed by protesters, as well as forcing payments for body retrieval. If true, these are cruel practices that compound grief with extortion. Mr. President, the rhetoric of labeling peaceful protesters as terrorists, rioters, or mercenaries, the same narrative deployed during the 2022 protest, seeks to justify brutal crackdowns and ignores this uprising's domestic organic nature. The Supreme Leader and the President have called for harsh action, and the head of the judiciary demanding swift prosecutions without leniency. Lethal forces by authorities can only be used as last resort to protect life and must be lawful, necessary, and proportionate. I have received countless videos capturing what appears to be the use of lethal force by security forces against unarmed protesters in violation of these principles. Tens of thousands of individuals, including school children, have reportedly been detained nationwide without legal counsel or family contact, with raids also conducted in hospitals. I've received information of detainees being coerced into making false confessions broadcast on television, reinforcing the state's narrative that protesters are dangerous criminals. Civic space has faced further restrictions, including media closures and intimidation of lawyers, journalists, and activists. The crackdown may soon extend to economic persecution, with proposals to confiscate assets of celebrities and business owners for supporting the protest. The scale of repression we are seeing today is among the most severe in its brutality and in scope in its recent history. Mr. President, now is the time for the international community to respond and to support the people of Iran in their pursuit for fundamental rights and accountability. As Special Rapporteur, I will, in coordination with OHCHR and the fact-finding mission, to continue monitoring the situation and to provide an update on the overall human rights situation at the next Council session. It's important to keep in mind that these protest-related violations occur within the context of Iran's broader human rights situation. For example, executions for homicides, drug-related offenses, and espionage have continued during the protest. Accordingly, I reiterate my request for a country visit. Mr. President, I am deeply concerned by the current situation and stress the need for thorough, independent investigation, including potential violations of international human rights law and international criminal law. I respectfully urge this Council to empower the fact-finding mission to investigate these protest-related violations to ensure transparency and accountability. The Iranian people have shown extraordinary courage in speaking truth to power. Now, the international community must respond with the urgency and commitment this situation demands. Thank you.
Gracias, señora.
Thank you, Special Rapporteur. I will now give the floor to Sarah Hossein, Chair of the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on the Islamic Republic of Iran, for a video message.
High Commissioner, Excellencies and colleagues. We have witnessed unprecedented levels of violence in the Islamic Republic of Iran in the past 3 weeks, marking what appears to be the deadliest crackdown against its people since the revolution of 1979. The protest that started on 28th December, sparked by an economic crisis and deteriorating living conditions, quickly spread to all 31 of Iran's provinces. After the government initially adopted a conciliatory tone, the state response appears to have devolved into increasing violence. The fact-finding mission on Iran has been interviewing witnesses and gathering evidence. What we can already see is deeply troubling. The information we have gathered points to severe human rights violations, including disproportionate use of force resulting in arbitrary killings and injuries, torture, sexual violence, arbitrary arrests and detentions, and forced confessions. The government of Iran has briefed the mission on the situation and provided reports with its perspective on the events, including allegations of external interference. In this regard, we underscore that threats or acts of unilateral military intervention by third states are clearly contrary to international law. Further, noting allegations of severe double standards in the application of international law, we reiterate that these do not absolve any state of its obligation to respect, protect, and ensure the enjoyment of human rights. The government of Iran has till now avoided an open account of the crisis, including by imposing a complete shutdown of the internet and mobile services since the 8th of January, which remains in place till now. Reports suggest that beginning that night and through the following days, security forces in Iran unleashed extensive and ferocious lethal force against protesters, including with assault rifles and heavy machine guns, leading to a staggering number of deaths. The government has itself acknowledged thousands of deaths, and credible information suggests the number is much higher. Physicians have reported hospitals overwhelmed with mass casualty conditions. We have been haunted by images of grieving relatives at the makeshift Karizak morgue in Tehran city, searching for their loved ones' corpses amongst what appear to be hundreds of body bags piled one on top of another. The government claims that at least 300 members of its security forces were amongst those killed, that relief workers and medical personnel were attacked, and public and private property, including healthcare facilities, damaged. Video footage which we've reviewed appears to show some individuals burning vehicles and buildings. But as you will recall, international human rights law imposes extremely strict criteria for the use of lethal force by law enforcement. Intentional lethal force may only be used when it is strictly unavoidable to protect life against an imminent threat. Despite the communications blackout, the mission has collected witness and victim accounts and assessed digital material which appears to show security forces firing lethal ammunition into crowds that did not present an imminent threat to life. Information received also indicates that thousands of people were injured. This includes by metal pellets reportedly fired deliberately into victims' faces, creating horrific injuries, and recalling the pattern of blinding protesters we saw during the 2022 protests. On 10th January alone, approximately 500 protesters with pellet injuries to their eyes appear to have been admitted to one hospital in Isfahan. Around 24,000 protesters appear to have been detained, including children, journalists, and human rights defenders, and nearly 100 confessions have been broadcast on state television, with most apparently forced. The judiciary has urged punishment for detained protesters, quote, as quickly as possible, without leniency, unquote, and threatened to prosecute, quote, rioters, unquote, for morabe, the offense of enmity against God, which carries the death penalty. Excellencies, when we view these recent protests alongside established historic patterns of violations identified in relation to the Women Life Freedom protests, it is clear that there is an urgent need to act. The violations we have seen do not appear to be sporadic events, but widespread across the country and imposed in an organized manner. We must gather evidence and establish whether human rights violations and crimes under international law have occurred. Perpetrators and the state structures enabling the violence we have seen must be identified and held to account, and victims must receive urgent assistance and protection. It is only through accountability and breaking the cycle of impunity that such abuses can be prevented from occurring again. Recent events underline how critical it is for this cycle to be halted to prevent further escalation and more irreparable harm. International law demands that we take action to end the violations, protect those at risk, and forge a real path to truth, justice, and accountability for women, men, and children in Iran. I thank you.
Thank you for your statements. I will now call on Mr. Payam Akhavan, Professor at the University of Toronto. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, High Commissioner, distinguished delegates, the people of Iran are living through a nightmare. Allow me to share the story of a family who spent 3 days searching for their son. He had left home to protest in the streets of Tehran, but never returned. In distress, his parents first searched the hospitals where many of the wounded have been abducted and killed. Having failed to find him, they went next to the notorious morgue in Kahrizak. They searched among countless bodies in black plastic bags, mutilated by bullet wounds, unceremoniously dumped on the floor like piles of garbage. Grieving families wanting to retrieve the bodies are told to pay exorbitant sums of money for the bullets used to kill their loved ones. Yet others are forced to sign confessions blaming imaginary terrorists for the murder of their children. Hope and horror were intertwined as the parents opened the black bags one by one. Their search was not in vain. They found their son still alive. He had miraculously survived severe bullet wounds, lying motionless inside the body bag for 3 days, pretending to be dead to avoid execution by a finishing shot to the head. Just imagine the relief that mother and father must have felt. But for most, there is no such miracle. The search ends in devastating grief. These are the scenes from hell confronting countless Iranians today. Mr. President, even against the blood-stained record of the Islamic Republic, extensively documented by the UN, the savagery of the past days is unprecedented. The authorities initially claimed that 5,000 had been killed, but reduced the figure to 3,000 2 days ago. This is a gross underestimate. 5 days ago, a report by medical doctors inside Iran put the number at 16,500 killed and 330,000 injured. The number increases each day because the killings haven't stopped. We may not know the exact number because of the internet blackout, but by any plausible estimate, this is the worst mass murder in the contemporary history of Iran. Our beautiful country has become a cemetery in which the hopes of our youth are buried. I began my career as a UN human rights officer here in Geneva in 1993 during the war in the former Yugoslavia. I went on to serve as a prosecutor at the International Criminal Tribunal in The Hague. I helped draft the indictment for the Srebrenica genocide, in which some 8,000 Bosnian Muslims were massacred during July of 1995. By comparison, at least twice that number has been killed in Iran in half the time. This is an extermination. And unlike Bosnia, there is no war between military forces. There is only a war by the Islamic Republic against unarmed youth crying for a better future. Mr. President, the Iranian people look to this council for justice. It is imperative to ensure that the international independent fact-finding mission has sufficient resources for its investigative function to preserve and collate the massive amounts of evidence to facilitate accountability. The Islamic Republic, of course, is not a party to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. The Security Council should be asked to make a Chapter 7 referral, even if it is unlikely to do so because of its cynical politics. We persist, however, in the hope that one day, in the not-too-distant future, in a democratic Iran, those most responsible for these crimes against humanity will be prosecuted before an independent and impartial special court. We have no doubt that Iran, too, will have its Nuremberg moment. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, attempts to portray these protests among millions as a foreign conspiracy is an insult to the memory of those who have sacrificed their lives for freedom. The Iranian people are heir to a rich and ancient civilization. Theirs is the heritage of Cyrus the Great, the author of the first human rights declaration from 2,500 years ago, and the cuneiform alphabet of the clay cylinder that is today housed in the British Museum. Theirs is the poetry of Sa'di of Shiraz, whose words adorn the UN headquarters in New York. Human beings are members of a whole, he reminds us, in creation of one essence and soul. Our collective pain and suffering has brought us ever closer together in a profound shared humanity. It has only increased our determination to put an end to this nightmare. Like our ancestors, we persist in the belief that in the end, light will triumph over the darkness. The day will come when we will dance in the streets and celebrate our freedom. And when that day comes, we will remember those who stood with us in our hour of need. Thank you.
Le agradezco esta declaración.
Thank you for your statement. In keeping with practice, we shall now hear the concerned country. I recognize the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran. You have 5 minutes.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. Vice President, distinguished members of the Council, ladies and gentlemen, the Islamic Republic of Iran addresses this special session with utmost clarity and resolve. We are here to state facts and to defend our people. The sponsors of this session and its outcome have never genuinely cared for the human rights of Iranians. Otherwise, they would have not imposed inhuman sanctions violating the basic rights of every Iranian. Nor would they have supported Israel's war of aggression that killed and injured over 5,000 Iranians, dismissively referred to as their dirty job. The presence of an individual on this panel who is funded by the U.S. Department of State and who has no affinity or alignment whatsoever with the Iranian people is in itself a telling indication of the bitter reality that this meeting serves merely as a pressure tool against Iran. Mr. Vice President, as the protest started on 28 December 2025, Iran fully recognized the right of people for peaceful protest and conducted negotiation channels with protesters. However, during the second phase, from 8 to 10 January, events were deliberately transformed into organized violence, including terrorist attacks, destruction of property, and armed actions against civilians and law enforcement. The government of Iran officially announced verified figures regarding the recent unrest. A total of 3,117 lives were lost, of which 2,427 were killed as a direct result of terrorist operations. These figures are the product of national investigation, legal documentation, and institutional accountability. Unlike those who selectively mourn victims for political convenience, Iran neither hides its dead nor outsources grief. We remain the principal claimant of justice and the sole authority pursuing accountability. Accordingly, the Islamic Republic of Iran does not recognize the legitimacy or validity of this special session and its subsequent resolution. Iran possesses independent national mechanisms for investigating and ensuring accountability for acts of violence and terrorism. Yesterday, the President Pezeshkian announced publicly that he has assigned various groups to carefully examine the causes and contributing factors of these incidents so that the root causes of violence can be identified and eliminated. He reiterated that protest is a natural right of citizens, and the government considers itself obliged to listen to the voice of the people. The legal status of all detainees will be reviewed strictly in accordance with due process. Those found guilty of offenses related to the riots will face full legal accountability, with proceedings conducted in respect of internationally recognized standards and safeguards, guaranteeing fairness impartiality, and transparency. Mr. Vice President, dear colleagues, Iranian nation with a civilization spanning 2,500 years has never accepted domination or colonial rule. History has proven repeatedly that Iran neither submits to foreign pressure nor tolerates covert aggression disguised as concern. The Iranian nation has endured wars, sanctions, terrorism, and relentless pressure, yet it stands united. This resilience is not accidental. It is the product of history, identity, the collective memory. Nations rooted in civilization do not collapse under noise, nor do they bend before hypocrisy. It is deeply ironic that states whose historical records are stained with war crimes, genocide, ethnic cleansing, and systemic violence, even against their own population, now attempt to lecture Iran on social governance and human rights. Such posturing deceives no one, particularly at a time when their complicity in ongoing atrocities and genocide is evident and documented. I thank you all.
Thank you for your statement. And we can now begin with the list of speakers. Allow me to remind you of the time limit of 2 minutes 30 seconds for council members and 1 minute 30 seconds for observers, state observers and other observers. In 15 minutes, the list of speakers will close. I will have to interrupt you and apologize in advance. We can now start with the list of speakers for council members, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Iceland on behalf of a group of 5 countries. Ms. Bogerud Katrin Ustgautu, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iceland, has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. This statement is on behalf of North Macedonia, Moldova, the United Kingdom, Germany, and my country, Iceland. Once again, the people of Iran have taken to the streets to demand a better life for themselves and their loved ones. In doing so, they are exercising their rights to freedom of expression and freedom of peaceful assembly and of association, and nothing more. We must, once again, the Iranian authorities have responded in a brutal and in a violent way, leaving thousands dead and many more injured and arbitrarily arrested. It is the obligations of states to uphold the human rights of their citizens, but when a government itself becomes the perpetrators of violations, it is our collective responsibility to act. This Council and the world cannot look away. Violence against peaceful protesters and mass killings must stop. The fact-finding mission is the only independent mechanism collecting and preserving evidence to ensure accountability. With the people of Iran being increasingly cut off from the outside world through internet and communication closures, this task is even more urgent. We must stand firmly with the people of Iran. So I therefore urge all the Council members to support the adoption of today's resolution. We owe it to the brave people of Iran, peacefully demanding dignity, justice and freedom. I thank you.
Muchas gracias, señora ministra.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. I now give the floor to Estonia, who will be submitting a video statement on behalf of a group of countries.
President, I had the honor to speak on behalf of the Nordic Baltic states. We express our solidarity with the people of Iran in their calls for promotion and protection of their human rights. We strongly condemn the human rights violations committed by the Iranian authorities since 28 December, including killings of protesters, use of violence, repression, arbitrary detention, and use of intimidation tactics. The shutdown of internet has provided cover for a crackdown on peaceful demonstrations. It limits documentation of human rights violations and disrupts emergency and life-saving services. This makes the work of the Special Rapporteur and the fact-finding mission on Iran more important. The killing of demonstrators must stop. We strongly urge Iranian authorities to immediately halt all forms of violence and repression against peaceful protesters. All individuals arbitrarily detained must be released immediately. The threat of summary and arbitrary executions must end. We call on Iranians to fully uphold the right to freedom of expression and right to information, including by restoring full access to the internet and communication services for all. All human rights violations must be investigated in the line with international human rights law, and those responsible held to account. We also support the adoption of the draft resolution and the renewal of the mandates there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the EU on behalf of a group of countries.
High Commissioner, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union. North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, Republic of Moldova, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Liechtenstein align themselves with this statement. The European Union stands in solidarity with the Iranian people who have voiced their legitimate aspirations for a better life, freedom and dignity. We strongly condemn the brutal repression of peaceful protests across Iran, which resulted in the deaths of thousands of civilians. We also condemn the reported widespread arbitrary arrests and detentions. Such gross violations and abuses must immediately stop. The European Union urges Iranian authorities to fully adhere to Iran's international obligations and fully uphold international law. All individuals arbitrarily detained must be released immediately. The EU strongly condemns any use of the death penalty to suppress internal dissent. The nationwide communications blackout is unacceptable. We urge Iranian authorities to restore all communications. There must be accountability for the dire events of the past weeks, and justice must be done for all those who were killed, injured, or detained only for exercising their human rights and for voicing legitimate demands. The EU fully supports the renewal of the mandates of the fact-finding mission and of the Special Rapporteur. It is paramount to end the cycle of systemic impunity for gross human rights violations carried out by state officials. The EU and its member states are exploring various tools to respond to the situation and support the Iranian people. The EU has taken targeted, restrictive measures against individuals and entities responsible for serious human rights violations in Iran. We will take further measures to target those responsible for the ongoing human rights violations and the repressions. We extend our full support to civil society and human rights defenders who are playing a crucial role. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of North Macedonia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. North Macedonia aligns itself with the statement of Iceland on behalf of the core group and the statement of the European Union delivered just a moment ago. In our national capacity, we thank the High Commissioner for Human Rights for his statement and assessment of the overall human rights situation in Iran. We reiterate our appreciation for the work of the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran and the fact-finding mechanism, and we support the continuation of their mandates. Furthermore, we express grave concern over the continued deterioration of human rights in Iran in the context of recent nationwide protests. Credible reports of violent repression of peaceful demonstrations, including excessive use of force, arbitrary arrests and detentions, torture, sexual and gender-based violence, and executions constitute serious violation of international human rights law. We are particularly alarmed by reports of unlawful killings of protesters, including children,
and by the targeting of women and girls for exercising their fundamental rights and freedoms, intimidation of victims' families, enforced disappearances, and the silencing of civil society, journalists, and human rights defenders further aggravate the situation. For we strongly condemn prolonged internet shutdowns and communication restrictions that undermine freedom of expression and access to information. We call on the Iranian authorities to immediately cease violence against peaceful protesters and arbitrary detention and executions, restore full internet access, and respect the right of freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly. Also, ensuring accountability remains essential to prevent further violations and impunity. For those reasons, North Macedonia calls upon all members of the Human Rights Council to lend their valuable support for the draft resolution tabled at this session. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Slovenia aligns itself with the EU statement. We are closely following developments in Iran, in particular on the recent violent suppression of protests and disproportionate use of force against peaceful protesters across the country. Slovenia expresses deep concern at the violence by Iranian security forces against protesters across Iran and credible reports of mass killings and arbitrary arrests, intimidation by security forces and detentions. Slovenia condemns the use of force and intimidation of individuals exercising their rights to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression, and stresses that such practices are unacceptable. We are also concerned about reports regarding rash trials of peaceful protesters who could face harsh punishments, including the death penalty, which are used by Iranian authorities as a tool of state intimidation. It is important to mention that severe restrictions on communications, including unrestricted access to the Internet and communication services, may have concealed the true scale of human rights violations. Slovenia expects the free flow of information to be guaranteed. We again call on the Iranian authorities to immediately cease violence against peaceful protesters, to respect their international obligations, and to ensure the protection of freedom of expression and assembly, as well as accountability for human rights violations. We reiterate the importance of restraint, dialogue, and diplomacy in ensuring sustainable peace and stability in Iran and the wider region. We call on Iranian authorities to cooperate fully with the UN Human Rights Council, its mandated investigations and special procedures, as well as with UN High Commissioner on Human Rights and his office. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Spain. Thank you very much, Vice President. Spain welcomes this holding of a special session on the worrying human rights situation in Iran, and where we agreed with its convening. We condemn all violence exercised against peaceful demonstrators in Iran, and we urge the authorities in the country to guarantee freedom of expression and peaceful demonstrations. These are public freedoms and they're universal rights that are pillars of any prosperous and peaceful societies. The arbitrary detentions of thousands of peaceful demonstrators and extrajudicial sentences are serious violations of international human rights law. We request that the Iranian authorities put an end to repression, to arbitrary detention, and that they suspend all summary execution sentences of demonstrators. The death penalty is a cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment which is contrary to human dignity and which should never be used to put an end to legitimate demonstrations of the citizenry. We also call on the Iranian authorities to lift immediately all restrictions on communications and to ensure the right of all citizens to free access to information. We believe there must be transparency as to the number of victims, and that the families of those who have died must know the whereabouts of their loved ones. Spain reiterates that the use of force cannot substitute dialogue in order to tackle pending matters in Iran, both externally and internally. Violence only leads to greater instability in Iran and in the whole region. We believe in multilateral cooperation and unconditional support for international law, and therefore Spain will continue to defend the rights of Iranians and condemn violence against them. Thank you.
La representación de Irak.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of Iraq.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We would like to reiterate that human rights are universal, indivisible, and complementary. We must deal with all human rights on an equal footing and with the same attention. The work of the Human Rights Council must be guided by the purposes and objectives of the Charter and human rights. It must be objective, non-selective. We must refrain from politicization and double standards. We reiterate the importance of having the language of dialogue in order to achieve peace and to have friendly relations between nations based on equality and rights. This enhances international cooperation. Iraq calls on all countries to work on enhancing human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, using dialogue, avoiding escalation, and to settle disputes in a peaceful manner in accordance with international law and the UN Charter. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. The list of speakers is now closed. I give the floor to the distinguished ambassador of France.
Merci.
Thank you, Vice President. France aligns itself with a statement made by the European Union. When we see unleashing violence, which is unprecedented in Iran, we express our full solidarity with the Iranian people, who for several weeks have been peacefully demonstrating to express their legitimate expectations of dignity, liberty, and the improvement in their standard of living. France believes that there has been arbitrary use of force by the Iranian authorities. There's been a detaining of demonstrators, and there's been an internet shutdown in order to bring about silence and stifle voices that are urging for an end of repression. We believe there must be the freedom of expression and freedom of peaceful assembly, including for young people, and there must be a re-establishment of internet connections. We stand alongside the Iranian people, and we ask that light be shone on this brutal repression and that justice be delivered for thousands of victims. We call for the immediate liberation of everyone arbitrarily detained. We condemn the use of torture and summary executions, and we believe there must never be use of the death penalty in any circumstance. We believe that with our partners, we must reconvene this council together with the Security Council. We must mobilize in order to document and find evidence of human rights violations and international crimes committed by the Iranian authorities since the 28th of December 25. We support renewing the mandate of the independent fact-finding missions and the special rapporteur. The mission has already collected thousands of pieces of evidence and has the testimonials of victims of human rights violations. There must be an investigation of recent violations committed by the Iranian regime. There must be cooperation with prosecutors in order to establish those responsible. We call for the adoption of the draft resolution. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. With regard to the continued reports of significant loss of life and injuries amongst the protesters in Iran, the Republic of Korea has been closely monitoring the growing instability within the region with concern. It is unquestionable that all individuals are entitled to the full and equal enjoyment of all aspects of human rights, including the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and freedom of expression. In light of this, the alleged human rights violations in Iran are of particular concern, including the alarming numbers of civilian casualties, detention of protesters, including children, and ongoing internet shutdown. Against this backdrop, my delegation emphasized that any use of force particularly lethal force, against peaceful protesters is unacceptable. It is imperative that the grievances of Iran's people be taken seriously, the underlying concerns facing them be properly addressed, and accountability for all alleged human rights violations be ensured. In this regard, while recalling the state's primary responsibility to respect its international human rights obligations, the Republic of Korea notes the importance of engagement with United Nations human rights mechanisms, which can support the implementation of those obligations. My delegation hopes for a peaceful resolution of the current situation in Iran and looks forward to tangible progress in enhancing the human rights situation through constructive cooperation between Iran and the international human rights mechanisms. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland.
Monsieur le Vice-Président.
Vice President. Switzerland welcomes holding this special session on the alarming human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran in the context of demonstrations which began on the 28th of December last year. Switzerland is deeply concerned by credible information indicating that there's been excessive use of force by security forces, including the use of lethal force. We're also concerned at reports saying that there are arbitrary executions as well as thousands of arrests and arbitrary detentions, including of children. We also note the severe restrictions to freedom of association, assembly and expression worsened by the internet shutdown and communication services, which blocks access to information and essential services. These developments are in flagrant contradiction with the international obligations of Iran, notably the ICCPR, and particularly the primordial respect of the right to life. Any restriction to freedom of expression and freedom of association and peaceful assembly must be provided for in law. They must be necessary and proportional. Switzerland urges the Iranian Authority to immediately put an end to violence, mass arrests and internet shutdowns, and to abstain from imposing the death penalty, including in connection with the demonstrations, and to take specific measures for de-escalation. This includes holding rapid, independent, impartial investigations, the establishment of responsibilities, and full cooperation with UN human rights mechanisms. This is why we support draft resolution S39L1 as submitted for adoption in this special session. Pursuant to its tradition and its mandate, Switzerland will continue to work for dialogue, respect of international law and protection of human dignity. Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt.
Mr. Vice President, Egypt is closely monitoring the developments in Iran and reaffirms the HRC's important role in supporting and promoting human rights around the world in a balanced and fair manner based on neutrality, objectivity and non-politicization, thus ensuring the HRC's continued delivery of its mandate efficiently and effectively and regaining the spirit of consensus within it. Egypt reaffirms that the right to peaceful assembly is guaranteed to all based on the determinants and standards stipulated in the ICCPR, and the ultimate responsibility lies with states in promoting human rights and protecting them. We regret the fall of civilian casualties during the recent demonstrations in Iran, and we reaffirm the importance of operationalizing national investigative and accountability mechanisms to hold those responsible accountable. It is our firm position that the creation of HRC mechanisms or expansion of existing mandates must be based on the consent of the country concerned, which strengthens cooperation and dialogue and conduces to providing technical assistance and capacity building to support the countries in fulfilling their obligations in promoting and protecting human rights and responding to their people's aspirations. Our joint efforts are important in rationalizing the HRC's resources, particularly in light of the liquidity crisis, and we insist on the importance of consultations before expanding activities or multiplying existing mechanisms. Thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Japan believes that universal values such as human rights, freedom, democracy, and the rule of law should be respected in every country. Based on this belief, we supported the holding of this special session. We are deeply concerned about the deterioration of the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran in light of the reports that many people have been killed or injured in the protests. Japan opposes any use of force against peaceful protests and calls upon the Islamic Republic of Iran to exercise maximum restraint and refrain from unnecessary or disproportionate measures. We urge the Islamic Republic of Iran to uphold the fundamental human rights of its citizens, in particular the right to freedom of expression, including freedom to seek, receive, and impart information, and the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association without fear of reprisal. Japan remains open to dialogue with the Islamic Republic of Iran to further exchange views on efforts to improve its human rights situation, including through a bilateral human rights dialogue. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. I call on the Distinguished Ambassador of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Albania expresses its grave concern regarding the serious and ongoing deterioration of the human rights situation in Iran, particularly in the context of the peaceful protests that began in 28 December 2025. We strongly deplore the excessive, disproportionate and lethal use of force against peaceful protesters, resulting in thousands of deaths, mass injuries and the use of firearms and other prohibited means in clear violation of international human rights law. We express our deep concern regarding the widespread arbitrary arrests and detentions, including of children, and the risk of the arbitrary application of the death penalty against recently arrested protesters. Albania reaffirms the right of all Iranians to life, liberty and security of person, as well as their rights to freedom of expression, association and peaceful assembly. Albania stresses the urgent need to ensure accountability and end impunity for serious human rights violations and all crimes under international law. We strongly support the extension of mandate of the independent international fact-finding mission on Iran, as well as the extension of the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran. Albania supports the conduct of urgent investigation into recent and ongoing violations, including with a view to future judicial proceedings in accordance with their mandates. Finally, Albania reiterates its support and solidarity with the Iranian people and its aspiration for full respect for their fundamental freedoms and rights, as well as for a better future. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on the Distinguished Ambassador of Brazil.
Very much. Mr. Vice President, Brazil is closely following the ongoing human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We strongly condemn the use of lethal force against peaceful protesters, and we are concerned by reports claiming arbitrary arrests and the targeting of children. We note that internet shutdowns violate the right to freedom of expression, including access to information. Brazil calls for maximum restraint and urges the Iranian government to conduct thorough and impartial investigations into all allegations of serious human rights violations. We're also worried about the potential impact on women's rights and freedoms. We encourage Iran to deepen its cooperation with the human rights treaty bodies and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to ensure the universal respect for civil and political rights, as well as to implement measures for reparations and reconciliation, with focus on vulnerable groups such as women, children, youth, and ethnic and religious minorities. Brazil maintains that the Iranian people alone hold the sovereign right to determine their country's future. Finally, Brazil reiterates its condemnation of unilateral, coercive measures against Iran. We underscore that such measures negatively impact the human rights of the population and exacerbate the country's economic challenges, which serve as a backdrop to the current demonstrations. I thank you.
Gracias. Tiene ahora la...
Thank you. I call on the Distinguished Representative of the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We thank the fact-finding mission, the Special Rapporteur and Mr. Akavan for their powerful statements today. The Iranian authorities' horrific response has claimed thousands of lives. Many more protesters exercising their rights to freedom of expression and assembly remain detained, their fates unclear. Iran's abhorrent use of the death penalty continues. On average, around 6 people are executed every day in Iran. We do not know the full scale of the violence and killing. The internet blackout imposed on the 8th of January prevented crucial communications and the full documentation of violations. Restrictions remain in place today. We should be clear, the scale of this horrendous killing is shocking, but the authorities' response is not. We all remember previous devastating crackdowns, including in 2009, 2019 and 2022. It's time to end these cycles of repression. It takes true bravery to speak out in the face of an authority prepared to fire at its own people. This is especially true of women and those from religious and ethnic minorities who continue to face severe repression in their daily lives. The Iranian authorities must be held accountable. This is why the fact-finding mission must be renewed today. We stand firmly with the Iranian people in their pursuit of justice. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on Thailand.
Thailand has been closely following the developments in the Islamic Republic of Iran and is deeply concerned over this situation. We sincerely hope I'm sorry, can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Thailand has been closely following developments in the Islamic Republic of Iran and is deeply concerned over the situation. We sincerely hope that the situation will be resolved peacefully, allowing a swift return to calm and normalcy. Thailand expresses its profound sympathy over the reported loss of life and injuries and extends our deepest condolences to the families affected. We emphasize the paramount importance of safeguarding lives, preventing further casualties, and avoiding any further deterioration of the situation. Thailand reaffirms its commitment to the principles of international law and human rights. We underscore the importance of constructive engagement in advancing an environment conducive to the promotion and protection of fundamental rights and freedoms, where stability is preserved through dialogue, restraint, and respect for international law among all relevant stakeholders. In this regard, we support the continued constructive engagement between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Human Rights Council. Lastly, Thailand further reaffirms the fundamental principles of international law and the Charter of the United Nations, which call for the peaceful resolution through dialogue and mutual respect among states, including respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity as the bedrock of peace and security. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on Cyprus, Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Cyprus aligns itself with the EU statement. The most recent wave of mass, peaceful protests in the Islamic Republic of Iran and their brutal repression raises very grave concerns regarding the Iranian authorities' respect for fundamental rights. Cyprus recalls Iran's obligations under international human rights law to respect the rights to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression. We note with alarm reports of thousands of deaths and injuries, arbitrary and incommunicado arrests, and severe repression across the country, including through indiscriminate and excessive use of force. Cyprus urges the Iranian authorities to ensure the prompt release of all individuals arbitrarily detained and to exercise maximum restraint in the use of force. Cyprus is particularly concerned about the reported use of the death penalty and other harsh punishments against recently detained individuals. We urge the Iranian authorities to suspend all executions. Cyprus strongly condemns restrictions on freedom of opinion and expression offline and online and calls for the immediate lifting of the nationwide internet blackout as well as the immediate restoration of communications. In this context, we reiterate our full support for the mandates of the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission and the Special Rapporteur. Their work remains indispensable in establishing facts, preserving evidence, and providing an objective assessment of Iran's compliance with its international human rights obligations. Ensuring justice and accountability for the gross violations of recent weeks is essential so as to address the long-standing pattern of impunity documented by the fact-finding mission. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on China.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. China has carefully listened to the statement of Iran and those of all other parties and has taken note of the efforts made by the Iranian government to address issue and information provided by the Iranian government. China's position on human rights is consistent and clear. China upholds the right of all countries to independently choose their own paths of human rights development, oppose interference in other countries' internal affairs on the pretext of human rights, oppose the imposition of country-specific HR mechanism without the consent of the country concerned, oppose double standards on human rights. Based on the above position, China does not support the convening of the special session of the Human Rights Council. The situation within Iran is in essence a matter of internal affairs and should be decided upon by the Iranian people themselves. China consistently advocates for adherence to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and international law, opposes the use and threat of force in international relations, opposes imposing one's own will on others, and opposes the return of the world to the law of the jungle. On the basis of respect of Iran's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity, the international community should support the Iranian government and its people in overcoming difficulties, maintaining national stability, and safeguarding their legitimate rights and interests. China is of the view, we hope, that all parties should resolve differences through dialogue and is ready to play China's constructive role to this end. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. South Africa reiterates its commitment to multilateralism and stands for the firm adherence to international rule of law. South Africa believes that the right to peaceful protest, freedom of expression, and freedom of association are universal rights that must be upheld and protected as enshrined in international human rights law. In this regard, all efforts must be expended to ensure the protection of the right to life, which remains sacrosanct. We are disturbed by the reports of violence, including the death and destruction of property during the demonstrations, and express our solidarity and condolences for the tragic loss of life. These deaths should be investigated promptly and violators must be held accountable. We are concerned at reports that show that there has been direct interference by external actors to sow divisions and deepen instability in Iran. To this end, we support the call for an independent inquiry that will ascertain the breaches of human rights by all. Furthermore, South Africa calls on the Iranian authorities to ensure that any action taken must accord with the principle of legality, necessity, proportionality, and precaution. We therefore urge maximum restraint. Mr. Vice President, the grievances of the Iranian people need to be heard and addressed, and not instrumentalized by anyone, as the High Commissioner articulated in his statement of 13 January this year, a point the resolution regrettably does not take into account. We need to adhere to the rules that we have collectively agreed to that govern our work. In this context of the Human Rights Council, we have agreed through the Resolution 5/1, paragraph 60, that country mandate periods will be 1 year. Yet the draft resolution before us conflicts with this decision. This deviation is of a major concern to my delegation. Mr. Vice President, all member states must adhere to the United Nations Charter, which mandates them to refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. These developments only serve to fuel instability, which is of no benefit to the Iranian people, nor to the security of the region or the world. A sustainable peace can only be achieved through solutions that center dialogue and the agency of the Iranian people. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Ghana welcomes convening this special session and appreciates the briefing provided by the High Commissioner and the distinguished delegation of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We have closely followed with concern reports emerging from the Islamic Republic of Iran following the protests that began on 28 December 2025, including the tragic loss of lives. These are indeed troubling and requires our Council's rapt attention as we collectively seek a path towards calm and restoration. My delegation wishes to reaffirm that the right to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression are fundamental human rights protected under international law. We further note that security responses to public demonstration must always be lawful, proportionate, and respectful of human dignity. We emphasize the responsibility of all states to ensure the protection of civilians and to prevent actions that could stoke tensions or deepen mistrust between civilians and authorities. We also underscore the importance of dialogue and engagement as the most sustainable path to addressing grievances. We encourage the authorities of the Islamic Republic of Iran to pursue transparent national processes, including independent investigations where appropriate, and to cooperate constructively with relevant international human rights mechanisms. Mr. Vice President, my delegation finally urges the Council to approach this situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran with fairness, objectivity, and consistency. Our collective goal should be the protection of human rights and not the deepening of divisions. In conclusion, Ghana stands ready to support efforts that promote de-escalation, accountability, and constructive engagement in line with the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on Pakistan.
President, Pakistan will always be a friend to Iran and Iranian people everywhere. Iran was the first country to recognize Pakistan's independence. Regardless of domestic or regional developments, the two peoples have always enjoyed strong bonds of friendship rooted in shared culture, history, and faith. Recent developments in Iran were therefore of great concern to Pakistan. All life is sacred. The deaths of first responders, medical staff, policemen, protesters, and bystanders are tragic and deeply regrettable. Rioting, arson, and attacks on government offices, places of worship, and elsewhere are very unsettling. International human rights law recognizes public safety and order as essential for the enjoyment of human rights. Pakistan welcomes the cessation of violence and the gradual return to normalcy in Iran. We also note Iran's commitment to uphold the due process of law. The protests cannot be separated from the context of the tragic loss of life and destruction that the people of Iran suffered as the result of a regional aggressor's unlawful military strikes last June. Maintaining peace and stability remains the best safeguard for the human rights of the people in Iran and across the region. This debate can also not overlook the adverse human rights impact of unilateral sanctions as aggravating factors underlying the protests. The High Commissioner and Special Procedures have repeatedly warned that these measures affect the dignity and rights of all Iranians. They also constrain the Iranian government's ability to uphold all human rights. Mr. Vice President, the Council must consider what the special session is expected to achieve. Sanctions, military actions, and interference have only caused suffering in Iran. The value of imposed mandates without the consent of Iran remains dubious. The situation of human rights is improved only with time-tested instruments of dialogue and cooperation. Geopolitical considerations must never outweigh the imperative for diplomacy and engagement. We invite the sponsors of this session to reflect. Confrontation only reduces space for genuine dialogue. It exposes the Council's universal mandate to charges of selectivity, and it does a disservice to the human rights of the people in Iran. Thank you.
Gracias,
Thank you. I call on Colombia.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Vice President. It's since 1928 where workers in our country were killed by the army during a strike related to a fruit country. This was known as the Banana Massacre, and it is a grave shame in our recent history. We looked also to the events of 2021. These episodes had a serious impact on human rights, with a loss of life, injuries, restrictions on freedom of expression and assembly, enforced disappearances, arbitrary disappearances. Following this painful episode, Colombia recognized peaceful coexistence as crucial for democracy and citizens' participation. It took us many years to achieve that, but it's better late than never. States must protect peaceful protest and make it possible, not suppress it. The use of force, we learned, cannot be the response to social movements calling for fundamental rights. Suffering taught us that the use of force in international relations is only harmful to human rights. From our own experience, with humility and respect, we urge the authorities of the Islamic Republic of Iran to cooperate with the universal human rights system and allow the necessary support to be provided so that the population may live in peace, including students, young people, women, so that they may be heard and their rights respected. We also urge it to stop the repression of peaceful demonstrations, free the people arbitrarily detained, and investigate effectively the human rights violations that have taken place in the context of the protests. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on the Ambassador of Cuba. Vice President, in recent weeks, many countries, the High Commissioner and mandate holders have pointed to serious violations of the UN Charter, international law, and human rights committed by the government of the USA with its brutal military aggression against Venezuela. However, the response of this Council has been absolute silence. There has been no special session called to consider these grave events. Only a few voices have spoken in this room to call for accountability, to reject the unacceptable, dangerous behavior of the USA. However, in the case of the Islamic Republic of Iran, we immediately see a special session with preparation of a resolution condemning it for increasing periods of time with not just one, but two parallel mechanisms of monitoring. We're not surprised. Unfortunately, this pattern of double standards is happening over and over in this Council. Cuba categorically rejects all forms of foreign intervention in Iran or any other country. We are opposed to any attempt to use the internal situation of any country for geopolitical agendas. We call for an end to the unilateral coercive measures against Iran and against those other countries that are suffering those. We denounce the imposition of interventionist mandates, which are always against developing countries. We will continue to defend dialogue and cooperation as the only effective way to promote human rights. I thank you, Ambassador.
Gracias. Tiene ahora la palabra.
Thank you. I call on the Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Kingdom of the Netherlands welcomes the convening of this special session, aligns itself with the statement of the European Union, and wishes to make 3 points. First, we call upon Iran to cease resorting to the use of lethal force and repression against protesters. Second, we urge Iran to ensure due process, to release all those who have been arbitrarily detained, and to refrain from applying the death penalty, particularly in light of the record number of executions carried out in 2025. Third, we call on Iran to uphold the human rights obligations, such as the freedom of expression, association and peaceful assembly, and to ensure the free flow of information, including full and unrestricted access to the Internet. Mr. Vice President, in light of these concerns, the Kingdom of the Netherlands supports the renewal of the mandate of the fact-finding mission and the Special Rapporteur on Iran, as well as the call for an urgent and independent investigation into recent developments. These steps are essential to ensure accountability for the human rights violations committed in the past weeks and to deliver justice for those who were killed, injured or arbitrarily detained solely for exercising their fundamental rights and expressing legitimate demands. We urge the Islamic Republic of Iran to fully cooperate with both the Special Rapporteur and the fact-finding mission. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on the distinguished delegation of Angola.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The government of the Republic of Angola reaffirms its strong commitment to promoting and protecting human rights and fundamental freedoms in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations and relevant international human rights instruments. In this context, the Angolan authorities reiterate its commitment to promoting and protecting human rights, advocating constructive dialogue and the importance of technical assistance in human rights matters. We also reaffirm our rejection of a politicization of human rights and the selectivity of special mechanisms, while emphasizing the need for international cooperation on human rights and respect for the sovereignty of states in line with the various United Nations instruments in this subject. We strongly believe that dialogue, inclusivity and genuine engagement among all stakeholders are the most effective means of preventing polarization and promoting sustainable long-term solutions. The Angolan delegation remains committed to constructive dialogue within the Human Rights Council to strengthen the credibility, objectivity and the universality of the international human rights system. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you. I call on Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Ethiopia reiterates its long-standing commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights through constructive dialogue, cooperation and mutual respect among member states. We firmly believe that the advancement of human rights is best achieved in an environment free from politicization, selectivity and double standards. With regard to the situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ethiopia underscores the fundamental principle that the primary responsibility for the protection and promotion of human rights rests with governments themselves in accordance with their constitutional, legal, and institutional frameworks and the will of their people. We emphasize the importance of upholding democratic rights and freedoms, including through inclusive national processes and dialogue, while fully respecting the principle of sovereignty and non-interference as enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. Domestic challenges, including those related to public order and social unrest, should be addressed through national mechanisms in a peaceful and lawful means. Ethiopia expresses concern over external approaches that seek to interfere in internal affairs or instrumentalize political movements against sovereign states. As such actions risk exacerbating tensions, undermining stability, and weakening national ownership of reform efforts. We stress that the Human Rights Council should serve as a platform for cooperation and dialogue, rather than confrontation. In this regard, Ethiopia encourages continued engagement with the international human rights mechanisms based on mutual respect, impartiality, and consent. In conclusion, Ethiopia calls upon all parties to uphold the principles of the United Nations Charter, respect sovereignty, and refrain from interference, and support peaceful and nationally driven solutions. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I call on Bulgaria.
Mr. President, Bulgaria aligns itself with the statement made by the European Union. Bulgaria is deeply concerned by the gravity of the situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran following the recent unprecedented crackdown of peaceful protests by the authorities. We are deeply concerned by the use of lethal weapons by security forces, which has led to the death of thousands of protesters and a high number of injured protesters. We denounce the widespread arbitrary arrests and detentions of participants in the protests. We are alarmed that the Iranian authorities have imposed a nationwide internet shutdown and communication blackout, affecting Iranians' right to freedom of expression and access to information, disrupting emergency and life-saving services. Bulgaria urges for the investigation of all killings, violence against protesters and other serious human rights violations and abuses in line with international human rights norms and standards. Those officials who are responsible for those human rights violations and abuses must be held to account. We call on the Iranian authorities to fulfill their country's obligations under international human rights law, to respect the rights to freedom of expression, association and peaceful assembly of individuals and their right to free flow of information. Bulgaria confirms its support to the independent international fact-finding mission and expects it, in line with its mandate, to thoroughly investigate all allegations of serious human rights violations and abuses perpetrated in relation to the protests that began on 28th of December 2025, including for potential future legal proceedings. We will support the extension of the mandate of the Special Rapporteur while being confident that she will closely monitor the current human rights situation, including the respect for and protection of civil, political, economic, social and cultural rights in Iran. I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the Distinguished Ambassador of Chile.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, Vice President. Chile welcomes the holding of this special session, given the violent repression and serious human rights violations committed in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We roundly condemn the deaths, the violence against demonstrators, and the excessive and disproportionate use of force by state officials in the context of peaceful protests that began on the 28th of December 2025. We also reject the blocking and restriction of communications, including the internet shutdown and the banning of mobile phones. These actions have led to thousands of deaths, according to current estimates, and there have been large-scale violations, torture, arbitrary executions, disappearances. We call for the upholding of rights, for freedom of peaceful assembly and association, and we believe Iranian citizens have the right to fully participate in public affairs in line with international human rights law. The recent events, Vice President, in Iran should be added to the very serious acts committed in 2022 and 23, when peaceful demonstrators were harassed, detained, and this disproportionately affected women and children. In addition to this, the acts of since December 2025 testify to systematic repression of peaceful demonstration. We therefore launch an appeal to the authorities of Iran to put an end to the repression of peaceful protests and to guarantee the full respect of fundamental rights. We firmly underline the need to carry out impartial, transparent, independent investigations, which will allow for proper accountability and access to justice, as well as comprehensive reparations for the victims of state action. Thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Italy.
Italy aligns itself with the European Union statement and wishes to add the following in its national capacity. We express our deepest concern over the violent repression of protests in the Islamic Republic of Iran and the reported severe human rights violations across the country. We strongly condemn the excessive and lethal use of force by security forces against demonstrators who were legitimately exercising their fundamental rights to freedom of expression, associations and peaceful assembly. Reports of thousands of deaths, widespread arbitrary arrests and serious ill treatment of detainees are deeply alarming and unacceptable. Italy unequivocally condemns the indiscriminate use of the death penalty as a means to suppress protest and silence dissent. Public statements by Iranian judicial authorities suggesting expedited trials and the possible imposition of capital punishments against protesters constitute a grave violation of Iranians' international human rights obligations and a direct assault on human dignity. Italy reiterates its firm opposition to the death penalty at all times and in all circumstances and urges the Iranian authorities to halt immediately all executions as a first step towards a more general moratorium. We echo the call of the United Nations High Commissioners for Human Rights for an immediate end to violence and repressions, as well as for the full restoration of Internet and telecommunication services. Internet shutdowns undermine fundamental freedoms, hinder independent monitoring, and exacerbate the suffering of the population. Italy urges Iranian authorities to release all those arbitrarily detained and ensure accountability for human rights violations committed in the context of the repression. In this regard, Italy strongly supports the mandates of the Special Rapporteur in Iran and the fact-finding mission and calls on Iranian authorities to fully cooperate with those mechanisms and start an open and democratic dialogue with the protesters. Italy stands in solidarity with the Iranian people and their legitimate aspirations for freedom, dignity and justice. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ecuador, Ambassador of Ecuador. Vice President, Ecuador agreed with those who called for the holding of a special session on the worsening human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran in the context of national protests, recognizing that we are faced with a situation which requires the attention of Council. The broad support for holding this session is a very clear signal that such situations must be discussed in the main United Nations body with competency in the field of human rights. My country expresses its deep concern and condemnation for the very serious events that have been reported in Iran since the 28th of December 2025, which have been reported by the Office of the High Commissioner and various special procedures. They testify to violence and repression exercised by state security forces against demonstrators, resulting in arbitrary detentions, people wounded, many thousands dead, including children. For these reasons, Ecuador rejects any act of violence against the civilian population and any measures which limit the exercise of human rights, including freedom of expression, of association, and of peaceful assembly. My delegation emphasizes the importance of ensuring that civil society, human rights defenders, journalists, and communication media must have a safe working environment, and there must be safe and free access to the internet. Vice President, Ecuador restates the importance of respecting the principles and standards of international law enshrined in the UN Charter. And we call on the authorities of Iran, as others have, to undertake a genuine dialogue and constructive cooperation with the independent international fact-finding mission, the Special Rapporteur, and other UN bodies in order to reduce tension, bring about independent investigations, ensure accountability, and protect dignity of all persons. Thank you.
Gracias. Tiene ahora la palabra.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished ambassador of the Dominican Republic. Thank you, Vice President. The Dominican Republic supports the holding of this special session of the Human Rights Council, and we share the concern of the international community when faced with recent information on developments in the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is up to this Council to heed situations that generate such global concern, particularly when there are allegations of excessive use of force, arbitrary detention and restrictions to fundamental freedoms in all contexts, particularly when there is protest. We take note of the reports submitted by the competent international bodies describing situations which violate the human rights of civilian population. These must be carefully and objectively analysed pursuant to international human rights standards and the mandate of this Council. We state once again that accountability, the respect of the rule of law and due process are essential to ensure effective protection of human rights and to strengthen the confidence and trust between the authorities and the population. We emphasise the importance of dialogue, technical cooperation and multilateralism in order to move towards sustainable solutions, making sure that there is space for constructive exchange, contributing trust and promoting gradual and lasting progress. We would therefore urge the Iranian authorities to strengthen their cooperation with international human rights mechanisms. We say once again that we are willing to support the efforts of Council in order to tackle this situation in a constructive manner and one which looks for specific solutions. Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to the Ambassador of the Czech Republic.
Mr. Vice President, we remain deeply concerned by the persistent repression of protests by the Iranian authorities against their armed population. Since late December 2025, people across Iran have peacefully expressed their legitimate aspirations for fundamental freedoms and improved living conditions. We are alarmed by the reports of numerous deaths and injuries among protesters. We strongly condemn the use of excessive and lethal force by security forces, as well as widespread arbitrary arrests, detention, intimidation, and judicial harassment. Such actions constitute serious violations of international human rights law, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which Iran is a state party. We call on the Iranian authorities to immediately cease all violent actions against peaceful protesters and to fully respect the rights to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and association. All individuals detained solely for exercising these fundamental rights must be released without delay, and due process guarantees must be upheld in all cases. We urge Iran to ensure full, safe and unhindered access to information and communications, including by refraining from internet shutdowns. We call on the Iranian authorities to intensify surveillance and the ongoing persecution of lawyers, journalists, social media users and human rights defenders, both within Iran and through acts of repression abroad. We reiterate our principled opposition to the use of the death penalty in all circumstances and call on the Iranian authorities to stop the executions. We reaffirm our solidarity with the Iranian people and express our full support for civil society actors and human rights defenders who, despite severe pressure and significant risk, play a crucial role in documenting violations, promoting human rights, and sharing information with the international community. Finally, we call on Iran to ensure accountability for all violations and grant unhindered access and full cooperation to the UN fact-finding mission and the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Iran. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished Ambassador of Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Kenya acknowledges the convening of this special session, particularly amid the recent nationwide protest sparked by economic grievances in Tehran's bazaar since late December 2025. We view today's discussion as a vital affirmation of our shared responsibility to tackle urgent human rights challenges through principled multilateral dialogue, fostering cooperation in a deeply polarized geopolitical landscape. These bedrock principles demand consistent, impartial application across all contexts and regions, free from selectivity or politicization, to uphold this Council's integrity in addressing global crises. Kenya shares concerns over allegations of human rights violations arising from these events, including allegations of excessive use of force and restrictions on freedoms. We recognize the contributing factors characterizing these protests, rooted in pressing economic hardships and aspirations for improved governance, which warrant thoughtful, constructive responses from the Iranian government. We equally acknowledge positive steps already taken by Iran, including its repeated invitations for dialogue, commitments to investigative allegations transparently, and engagement with the national partners as conveyed in statement to this Council and beyond. At the same time, the rights to peaceful assembly, expression, and association impose reciprocal duties on individuals to exercise them lawfully, peacefully, while states retain their sovereign prerogative and international law to apply proportionate restrictions safeguarding public order and national security. Mr. Vice President, all human rights mechanisms must prioritize cooperative avenues that respect sovereignty, non-interference, while underscoring that their mandates are most effective while the full consent and cooperation of the states concerned. In this spirit, Kenya encourages Iran to pursue further confidence-building measures, ensuring due processes for all detainees, reviewing crowd control practices and use of force to align with best practices and enhance its engagement with UN mechanisms and partners. We believe that inclusive dialogue would exemplify Iran's commitment to accountability, mutual trust, and balanced principled path this Council exists to promote. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the representative of the plurinational state of Bolivia. Thank you, Vice President. We welcome the report submitted by the High Commissioner and the Special Rapporteur and the President of the Independent Fact-Finding Commission. Bolivia reaffirms its commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights and the free exercise of fundamental freedoms by all persons and the obligation of states to guarantee these. In any situation, the right to life and the respect of human rights and the peaceful settlement of disputes must prevail, and this is in line with the UN Charter. We call for avoiding confrontation and through transparent proceedings, the perpetrators of any acts of violence or human rights violations must be held accountable in line with international standards. We believe that all international stakeholders must tackle such situations with diplomacy in line with international law and avoid any act that might lead to an escalation of the situation. At the same time, we must ensure there is consistency in all mechanisms, balancing costs and effective results and avoiding duplication. We hope that all parties will be able to resume dialogue and negotiation, de-escalate tension, settle differences in a climate of mutual respect, and also meet the legitimate aspirations of the peoples. Thank you. Thank you. We can now move on to the list of speakers, of observers of the Council. I give the floor in the first instance to the distinguished representative of Germany, Secretary of State Bernhard Korsch.
Mr. President, once again this Council convenes to address human rights violations in Iran. Once again, peaceful protesters standing up for their inviolable rights have been violently attacked, arbitrarily arrested or killed. We have all listened to the statements of the High Commissioner, the fact-finding mission and the Special Rapporteur. Germany thanks all Member States for coming together for this special session. Today, let us send a strong, united signal of solidarity with those suffering human rights abuses in Iran, those standing up for their rights. Today, we want to shed light on human rights violations that Iran is trying to hide behind an internet blackout. Germany commends the fact-finding mission and the Special Rapporteur for their tireless efforts to document and investigate abuses and to improve the human rights situation. We call on the Iranian government to cooperate fully with these mandates. The tragic events of the past weeks and the reporting today underline once more why we need both the fact-finding mission and the Special Rapporteur. We call on this Council to join us in extending both mandates to ensure that their crucial work for human rights and accountability can continue. Thank you very much.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished delegation of Luxembourg that will be making a video statement. Thank you, Vice President. Luxembourg aligns itself with the declaration of the EU, and we reiterate our support to the Iranian people. We firmly condemn the violent repression of demonstrations in Iran. We are alarmed by the reports and the images showing that there are countless deaths, thousands wounded, and mass arbitrary arrests. Many Iranian men and women are disappeared. We are very much affected by the loss of life in Iran, including that of children, and our thoughts are with their families. Human rights, including the right to freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly, must be respected and protected at all times. Iran must respect them and fully guarantee such rights. We are bringing today the voice of Iranian men and women, and it is up to them to decide how they would like to shape their future. Access to the media and to independent information, including comprehensive access to the internet, is essential. We renew our appeal to the leaders of the Islamic Republic to abolish the death penalty, to put an end to the cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment, and to free all political prisoners. Transparent and independent investigations must immediately be launched in order to bring the perpetrators of such crimes to justice. Along these lines, we support extending the mandate of the independent fact-finding mission. Thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to the Distinguished Ambassador of Ireland.
Thank you, Vice President. The events, Ireland aligns with the statement of the EU. The events in Iran serve as a shocking reminder of how the Iranian regime treats its own people. Ireland condemns the brutal repression, killing and imprisonment of protesters exercising the fundamental rights of freedom of expression and peaceful assembly.
Apologies, I must interrupt you. There's a point of order.
President, the use of undefined and non-standard term of calling other countries shows the malintention of the speaker to lead the Council's direction toward their political aims. Mr. President, with the aim of preserving the true dignity of human rights, respecting the status of countries, and preventing the further politicization of the Council, I request you not to allow using the not correct languages calling my country. The name of my country is the Islamic Republic of Iran. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would remind all speakers of the need to use a standard language which is approved by the United Nations. So please do continue with your statement, Ireland.
Thank you, Vice President. Thank you, Vice President. I'll continue. Ireland condemns the brutal repression, killing and imprisonment of protesters exercising the fundamental rights of freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. We reject the characterisation of peaceful protesters as domestic terrorists, and we condemn recourse to the use of executions. Verified information is limited by the deliberate choice of the authorities of the Islamic Republic of Iran to prevent their actions being observed and reported. However, it is clear that massive human rights violations have occurred, including the killing of civilians and many instances of unprovoked and indiscriminate attacks against protesters using lethal force, including the use of automatic weapons. The freedom to seek, receive and impart information must be upheld as an undisputed right. The people of Iran must have full access to telephone and internet services. We call on the Islamic Republic of Iran to cease all violent actions against civilians, suspend executions, to restore communication services and to engage meaningfully with the concerns and demands expressed by so many people across the country. Ireland hopes that today's special session can ensure that events surrounding the protests and the overall human rights situation in the country can be clearly investigated and the perpetrators held accountable. The international community must hold the Islamic Republic of Iran to its obligations to protect and ensure the fundamental rights of its people. Thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Ukraine aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union. We strongly condemn the repression of the Iranian authorities against their own people, including the unprecedented increase in death and injuries among protesters. This is a gross violation of fundamental human rights and freedoms. We underline the crucial role of the FFMI and Special Rapporteur on documenting violations. We call on the Iranian authorities to abandon forceful methods, respect the rights of citizens to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression, and fulfill the legitimate demands of their own people. Violence against defenseless protesters must be stopped immediately. Mr. Vice President, Iran's support for Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and its oppression of its own citizens are part of the same policy, a policy of violence and disregard for human beings.
I'm afraid there's another point of order. The delegation of Iran, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm sorry that I'm requesting for the second time point of order. The content presented by the current speaker is inaccurate, irrelevant to the subject of this meeting, and intended to involve another country in a matter to which it has not connection. I respectfully request that you prevent the raising of such irrelevant and unfounded issues. Thank you very much.
Gracias.
Thank you. I would like to ask the delegate of Ukraine to continue their statement.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Iranian people deserve to have their fundamental civic rights protected, including access to information and freedom of assembly. They deserve a normal life, free of fear, a life with freedom, safety, and prosperity. We reiterate our call on the international community to increase political, diplomatic, and other pressure on Tehran in response to violence and oppression. Ukraine stands in solidarity with the people of Iran. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belarus.
Thank you. Belarus considers the special session to be another attempt by a group of states to use the Council's mechanisms to put pressure on Iran's authorities. The draft resolution effectively promotes intervention in internal affairs, and the initiators of the resolution are using sanctions against Iran, harming its economy and undermining the economic and social rights of the people. That group of countries is carrying out unlawful extremist activity to destabilize the situation towards an unconstitutional change of power. We have seen similar scenarios, and we know the results. The loss of statehood, the harm to the economy, and the impoverishment of the population. We condemn such policies against Iran, as well as the politicized decisions in the Council, and we hope that the people and the authorities of Iran, through dialogue and cooperation, can overcome this situation and ensure justice, equality, peace, and human rights. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, Vice President. Australia welcomes this special session to address the deteriorating human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran and supports the renewal of the mandate of the fact-finding mission in Iran and the Special Rapporteur on Iran. Australia unequivocally condemns the Iranian government's brutal violence against its own people. We urge Iran to immediately end its killing of protesters, arbitrary arrests, telecommunications blackouts and intimidation tactics. We are appalled by reports that Iran has used the death penalty against protesters. Iran's actions continue its record of excessive, often lethal force against protesters, human rights activists, journalists and political opponents, and its long-standing oppression of women, ethnic and religious minorities and LGBTQI+ persons. Contrary to Iran's disinformation, these protests are not a foreign conspiracy. They are real voices of the Iranian people. We stand with the protesters in their struggle for human rights, livelihoods and fundamental freedoms. We call on Iran to ensure the rights to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly without fear of reprisal. All violations must be independently investigated and perpetrators held accountable and brought to justice. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Austria aligns with the EU statement. We stand in full solidarity with the Iranian people in exercising the rights of freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. Austria is deeply concerned about the shockingly high number of deaths among protesters and the disproportionate use of force by Iranian security forces against peaceful demonstrators. We strongly condemn the arbitrary arrests and threats of execution against those detained for exercising their rights and urge the Iranian authorities to end all forms of arbitrary detention and mistreatment in custody. All individuals imprisoned for freedom of expression and peaceful protest must be released immediately. We particularly condemn the use of force against children and the arbitrary arrest and detention of minors in connection with the protests and call for their immediate release. Austria also condemns the nationwide internet shutdown imposed by Iranian authorities and calls for the immediate restoration of internet access and communication systems. This Council cannot remain silent in the face of the deteriorating human rights situation. We owe the Iranian people a thorough, independent and objective investigation into all human rights violations related to the protests. Perpetrators of violence must be held accountable. We call on the Iranian government to fully cooperate with the fact-finding mission in its investigation. I thank you.
Gracias. Tiene ahora la palabra la
Thank you. I give the floor to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Thank you, Vice President. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela reaffirmed its solidarity with the people and government of the Islamic Republic of Iran, profoundly regretting the loss of human life following violent protests that were financed, armed, technologically supported and encouraged by foreign actors. Venezuela strenuously rejects selectivity, double standards and instrumentalization of human rights for geopolitical purposes and expresses its profound concern at the use of this Council as a tool of pressure against sovereign states. Self-determination of Iran should be respected. We regret that this special session has been convened on the basis of piecemeal narratives that intentionally ignore the causes and distort the reality of the facts. The external threats against the leaders of the legitimate government of Iran and against people victim of UCMs have been public, notorious and performative. The ultimate goal is to apply the deleterious policy of regime change to appropriate their natural resources. There's no hiding the pretension to end with international public law and the threats to global peace, sovereignty of states and immunity of heads of state and government. We do wonder, will this Council continue to be used as a sounding box for the imperial powers who direct us towards barbarities such as the genocide that is taking place in Gaza? Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to the Distinguished Representative of Paraguay.
Vicepresidente.
Vice President, Paraguay condemns the repressions carried out by the authorities of the Islamic Republic of Iran against their own people in the context of the recent social protests, the deliberate, disproportionate use of force by security forces, including firing on protesters, mass arbitrary detention, and an alarming high number of people perishing and arrested, is a grave violation of human rights by the Iranian state. Paraguay categorically repudiates the restrictions imposed on access to internet and communications, considering such measures seek to hide the situation, silence civil society and hinder international scrutiny. It's unacceptable the criminalization of social protests and the threat of use of death penalty against protesters for actors that reflect an unacceptable setback and question the international responsibility of the state. We urge the Iranian authorities to immediately cease all forms of violence against the civilian population, to release all persons detained for peacefully exercising their fundamental rights, restoring fully digital freedoms and calling for full unrestricted cooperation with the fact-finding mission. Finally, Paraguay reaffirms its firm conviction that there be no stability, development and legitimacy without respect for human rights, and this Council is duty-bound morally and legally to promote accountability, prevent impunity and support the legitimate aspirations of the Iranian people. Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor to the Distinguished Representative of Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We align ourselves with the EU statement. Belgium unequivocally condemns the unprecedented violence perpetrated by the Iranian government against its own citizens. Credible estimates are pointing towards thousands of deaths. We are horrified by these killings. The violent repression against Iranians voicing their legitimate and democratic aspirations must stop. The authorities must exercise utmost restraint and adhere to their international obligations. We urge the Islamic Republic of Iran to fully uphold the right to life, liberty and security of person and the right to freedom of expression, association and peaceful assembly. The immediate restoration of full Internet access is imperative in this regard, as is the immediate release of all individuals arbitrarily detained. We are deeply worried by reports regarding rushed trials and possible protest-related executions. At the same time, Iranian authorities are obliged to conduct prompt, effective, independent, transparent and impartial investigations into the grave violations that occurred. We urge the Islamic Republic of Iran to fully cooperate with UN entities, particularly the Special Rapporteur and the FFM. We support the renewal of their mandates as well as the request for an urgent inquiry into current events. In conclusion, the legitimate and democratic aspirations of the Iranian people must prevail as much as the respect for international law. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Distinguished Representative of Oman.
Shukran, sir. Thank you, Vice President. Oman reiterates its support to the work of the Human Rights Council, all its mechanisms, as an international framework to address human rights issues through cooperation, responsible dialogue, and exchange of expertise. We reiterate that the effectiveness of the Council is contingent on an approach that respects the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and promotes confidence among states and addresses human rights issues in an objective and balanced fashion. In this respect, Oman believes that respect of the sovereignty and unity of states, as well as a commitment to the principle of non-interference in their domestic affairs, constitute a crucial basis for a stable international order, and they are the genuine guarantee for non-politicization of human rights issues or manipulating them outside their noble purposes. And therefore, Oman believes that the basic objective of the Human Rights Council mechanisms, including the mandate of the Special Rapporteur, is to prepare reports in a professional manner and in an objective, independent and neutral manner as well, because these are basic elements to safeguard the credibility of the Council as well as its standing as an international forum for balanced dialogue as well as cooperation. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor now to the Distinguished Representative of Uruguay. Thank you very much, Vice President. Uruguay is grateful for the convening of this special session, given the grave deterioration of the situation of human rights in Iran, as reported by various UN mechanisms and by independent organizations, which merits the urgent attention of this Council. We express our profound concern violations of human rights documented, which include the disproportionate use of force against protesters, arbitrary detention, acts of torture and other cruel, inhumane, degrading treatment. We're particularly alarmed by persisting patterns of structural discrimination against women and girls, as well as the persecution of individuals belonging to ethnic and religious minorities. Uruguay urges the Iranian authorities to fully deliver on their human rights obligations, guaranteeing the full respect for the right to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and free access to communications, as well as the need to ensure accountability for all violations committed. Finally, we should recall the primary responsibility of the state to protect its own population, a responsibility inherent to the sovereign nature of the state and to its obligations under international law. Thank you. Thank you. I give the floor now to the Distinguished Representative of Eritrea.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. When challenging situations arise, the appropriate and responsible response of the multilateral system must begin with dialogue, cooperation, and a genuine effort to understand circumstances on the ground. This Council was not established to construct narratives that served the interests of a few, nor to repeatedly single out targeted countries. It was created to strengthen the promotion and protection of human rights through dialogue and cooperation. Despite this, we repeatedly see attempts to circumvent the Council's guiding principles and established frameworks whenever it suits particular agendas. There is a persistent effort to impose mandates on states without their consent or cooperation. Such practices are problematic. They cast doubt on the likelihood of constructive outcomes and on whether the Council should accept without rigorous scrutiny outputs presented as credible despite flawed or politicized methodologies. To conclude, in the context of the recent developments, while we acknowledge the legitimate responsibility of the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran to restore public order and safety, we encourage national processes addressing existing challenges in accordance with the national priorities. The full version of our statement will be available online. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you. I give the floor now to the distinguished delegation of Liechtenstein.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Liechtenstein has supported the call for this special session out of concern for the thousands of Iranians who once again have carried their hope and demand for fundamental changes in the governance of their country to the streets. We are deeply disturbed by the reports of the widespread and systematic lethal use of force against peaceful protesters by the security forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran. While the numbers remain difficult to verify, it is clear that the force employed was manifestly excessive and raises grave concerns, and that the violence used to crack down on the protest was deliberate in its use and indiscriminate in its targets. Mr. Vice President, an independent investigation into the situation is of paramount importance. If confirmed, these acts would constitute crimes against humanity and warrant a referral to the International Criminal Court by the UN Security Council. The court is an institution we have built collectively to address such situations by holding those responsible to account, thereby preventing future recurrence. In this way, we protect the people whose rights were gravely and systematically violated by those who claim to represent their interests. It is important that the Council sends a clear message in that regard. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias. Thank you. The floor, distinguished representative of Malta.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Malta aligns itself with the EU statement. We are gravely concerned by the reports on the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran, particularly the killing and injury of many Iranian people who were protesting in the streets. We join the High Commissioner in expressing our strongest concern over the designation of protesters as terrorists. Regardless of gender, belief or opinion, all people, including Iranians, have the right to protest and voice their opinions. These rights, among others, are fundamental human rights established by the UN Declaration of Human Rights, the ICCPR, and various other international documents to which the Islamic Republic of Iran is a state party. Iran, therefore, has a direct responsibility to adhere to what it freely subscribed to. We would also like to express our deep concern that some arrested protesters may be subject to the death penalty. While reiterating Malta's long-standing stance against the death penalty in all instances, we wish to recall that Article 6 of the ICCPR clearly states that this penalty may be imposed only for the most serious crimes. Civilians exercising their right of protest have committed no crime. We call upon all relevant authorities in Iran to free all arrested protesters and immediately halt and expunge any planned application of the death penalty. I thank you.
Gracias. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Zimbabwe is worried by the continued politicization of the Human Rights Council and use of double standards. Though we are concerned with by the situation in Iran, we believe that the government of Iran will handle the situation as per their given mandate. Zimbabwe believes in the need to protect the right to peaceful demonstrations, but that right should not be misused to abuse national security, public safety, or impinge on the right and freedom of other citizens. Zimbabwe reiterates its firm belief that the mandate and objectives of the Human Rights Council are better achieved when its work is conducted in an open and transparent manner based on mutually respectful dialogue and engagement that is conceived to support the effort of each country rather than to condemn and punish it. We urge the Council to engage Iran through genuine and constructive dialogue that upholds the principles of sovereignty and non-interference in its internal affairs. imposition of country-specific mandates or omissions only serve to erode the trust in Human Rights Council mechanisms. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovakia.
Thank you, Vice President. Slovakia aligns itself with the EU statement. We express grave concern at the deteriorating human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran and ongoing and systematic violation of these rights. Peaceful protests in the country have been met with an unprecedented violent response. Reports paint a glooming picture of the unlawful killing of thousands of those exercising their fundamental rights, including children, as well as the widespread use of excessive force, causing grave injuries and deaths. We are alarmed by continued arbitrary arrests and detentions, enforced disappearances, detention with no contact with the outside world. We urge to proceed on independent investigations under international organizations to document seriously all abuses carried out by Iranian authorities. Furthermore, after investigation, we urge to release all persons detained without trial. The intentional internet shutdown, which violates international human rights law, further prevents much-needed monitoring of the situation, documentation and violations, and further exacerbates the violations of rights and freedoms of Iranian people. While reaffirming our respect for Iran's sovereignty and territorial integrity, we stress that the primary responsibility to respect, protect and fulfil human rights bears with the state. We urge the Iranian authorities to fully uphold their obligations under international law, especially freedom of expression and assembly, as well as to take all necessary steps to eliminate and prevent further violence against civilians. Slovakia, lastly, we call on Iran to engage constructively and transparently, including by granting unhindered access to mechanisms.
Gracias.
I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. I give the floor now to the distinguished representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Greece aligns itself with the EU statement. The unprecedented, extreme violence used against peaceful Iranian protesters, leading to the deaths of thousands of innocent civilians, is shocking and unacceptable. Mass arrests and harsh judicial responses, including the use of the death penalty, deepen our concern regarding the human rights situation in the country. Beyond the violent repression, the rights of freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly have been dealt a serious blow by the internet shutdown and communications blackout, which restrict the flow of information and obstruct independent scrutiny. Restoring full access to communications is essential for transparency and accountability. We support international efforts to document abuses and ensure justice, as well as the indispensable role played by civil society and human rights defenders under extremely challenging conditions. Greece underlines the need for restraint, de-escalation, and respect for international human rights and humanitarian law. Executions must immediately cease, and all those arbitrarily detained must be released without delay. Dialogue remains the only way to respond to legitimate concerns and reduce the risk of further violence. Combined with accountability and an end to systemic impunity for gross human rights violations, it is the only credible path toward a peaceful and dignified future for the Iranian people. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Moldova.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. The Republic of Moldova is deeply concerned about the developments in the Islamic Republic of Iran. We condemn serious human rights violations and the brutal repression of peaceful protests. The arbitrary arrests, use of lethal and excessive force against the protesters, and unlawful killings is alarming. The death toll among protesters, including children, has reached thousands, which is an unprecedented number. We are also appalled by the high numbers of injured protesters. We reiterate our grave concern over the very high number of executions in Iran and urge the authorities to refrain from the use of the death penalty against those exercising their rights. We call for the release of all those arbitrarily arrested. We urge Iranian authorities to guarantee respect for the fundamental rights and freedoms of all individuals and to fully restore internet access throughout the country. All those responsible for human rights violations must answer for their actions. Mr. Vice President, we support the message of the High Commissioner. What we need to know is to bring light to what happens on the streets of Iran. As member of the core group, we believe that the work of the Special Rapporteur and the fact-finding mission is of paramount importance at this time. We therefore call on all members to support the resolution extending these mandates. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Montenegro.
Mr. Vice President, Montenegro aligns itself with the EU statement. The brutal crackdown on peaceful protests by Iranian security forces is unacceptable. People across the country are legitimately demanding freedom, dignity and a better life. These voices must be heard, not silenced. We strongly condemn the excessive and lethal force used by authorities, resulting in thousands of deaths and arbitrary arrests, including children. Violence and intimidation are never legitimate responses to public grievances, and the labelling of peaceful protesters as security threats to justify brutality must end. Authorities must fully comply with their international human rights obligations, including respect for the rights to life, liberty and security, as well as the freedoms of expression, association and peaceful assembly. All individuals detained solely for exercising these rights must be released immediately. Reports of rash judicial proceedings and the threat of the death penalty are deeply alarming. Capital punishment should never be used to suppress dissent, and all execution must stop now. The prolonged disruption of the Internet and communication services is a blatant violation of fundamental freedoms and must end to allow the documentation of abuses. Therefore, Montenegro calls for the renewal of the mandates of the fact-finding missions and the special rapporteur. We also stand firmly with civil society. Full cooperation with these mechanisms is essential to ensure accountability, address impunity, prevent further violations, and protect the rights of all Iranians. Thank you.
Gracias. Tiene ahora la palabra la distinguida.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. We are concerned by attempts by foreign powers to destabilize the situation in Iran. The current special session is a blatant confirmation of this. The initiators of the session ignore the gradual normalization of the situation in Iran following the riots and actions of disobedience inspired from abroad. It's paradoxical that the countries today accusing Tehran of excessive violence
concerned by the deteriorating human rights situation in Iran. We are profoundly disturbed by the escalation of violence and repression in Iran. We unequivocally condemn the brutal crackdown carried out by Iran's security forces in recent weeks, including the widespread killing and arbitrary arrest and detention of protesters and internet shutdowns. We call on the government of Iran to uphold its international human rights obligations, including Iranians' rights to peaceful process, freedom of expression and access to information. New Zealand continues to be alarmed by the surge in executions over the last year, which include protesters and minors, and calls on Iran to establish a moratorium on the use of the death penalty. New Zealand supports the convening of this special session, as well as the renewal of the mandate of the Special Rapporteur and fact-finding mission. These are important tools to progress accountability for human rights violations in Iran. I thank you.
Gracias. Tiene ahora la palabra.
Thank you very much. I now recognise Argentina. Thank you very much, Vice President. Argentina supports the draft resolution concerning the serious and persistent deterioration of the human rights situation in the Islamic Republic of Iran, in particular the violent repression of peaceful protest, which are costing the lives of thousands of citizens. This Council must find a robust response to this. On the draft resolution, we believe it should not just be limited to SGBV, rather all forms of violence.
conducted by the state, interpreting the term gender in line with Article 7.3 of the Rome Statute, and we'd like that to be duly reflected. We urge the Islamic Republic of Iran to end immediately the violations, guaranteeing accountability and combating impunity, and as well as cooperating fully with this Council's mechanisms, including the International Fact-Finding Mission and the Special Rapporteur. President, a just government is one that protects its citizens. When a government turns on its own people, there is no sovereignty that can be used as a fig leaf excuse or reasonable arguments that can justify this level of violence. The violent action undertaken by the government demonstrates that they fear truth and, as a result, fear their people. On the other hand, the fantastic Iranian people have demonstrated that they no longer fear their government and that they can kill thousands, but they cannot be cowed simply because they are inspired by a value that is far more powerful than the greatest army, and that is the defence of their own freedom. Thank you very much, Vice President. Thank you very much. I now recognise the distinguished representative of Korea, DPRK.
Mr. Vice President, the delegation of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea does not support the holding of this special session and the practice of tabling a politically motivated resolution targeting a specific country. Any subversive activities of the external forces aimed at overthrowing the socio-political systems of sovereign states and interference in their internal affairs, including the use of force or the threat of use of force, constitute serious violations of the UN Charter and universally recognized norms of international law. Attempts to justify such actions under the pretext of human rights advocacy, particularly when they are aimed at regime change, are deemed unacceptable. The international community must remain vigilant against such destabilizing practices and raise their voices for justice. We reaffirm our principled commitment to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, and we call upon the Human Rights Council to stand against politicization, selectivity, and double standards of human rights. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor now to the distinguished delegation of Portugal.
Senhor Vice-Presidente, Portugal expresses its profound concern over the violent repression of peaceful
microphone, please, for the speaker.
Islamic Republic of Iran, which has already caused multiple casualties, and calls on the Iranian authorities to respect its obligations under international law. We underline our support for the Iranian people as they peacefully strive for justice, equality and freedom. Reports of arbitrary detentions, intimidation of demonstrators, journalists, civil society actors and human rights defenders, as well as widespread restrictions on internet access, are deeply alarming. We are concerned by reports indicating that detained protesters might be under increased risk of expedited trials, torture, use of capital punishment, and other serious violations of fair trial standards and of their right to life. Portugal calls on Iran to release all individuals detained solely for exercising their rights and reiterates its firm opposition to the death penalty. Portugal strongly supports the renewal of the mandates of the Special Rapporteur and of the FFM, which are essential for monetary reporting and, not least, accountability. We urge Iran to fully cooperate and provide them unhindered access. Portugal stands ready to support all efforts to address this urgent human rights situation and achieve tangible improvements on the ground. I thank you, Chairman.
Gracias. Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Burkina Faso. Vice President, Burkina Faso takes note of the holding of this special session, which is very concerning, both in terms of what's the timing and the context. This situation takes place in a situation marked by persistent pressure being exerted on the Islamic Republic of Iran and raises legitimate question marks as to instrumentalization of human rights for the purpose of the foreign policy and persistent practice of double standards within our organization. These practices run counter to principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, non-interference, as enshrined in the UN Charter, and risks weakening the credibility of our Is multilateral cooperation mechanism in the field of human rights. My delegation reaffirms the commitment of Burkina Faso to the universal values of human rights, recalling that the primary responsibility for implementation rests with states while respecting their legal framework and their national reality. The right to peaceful protest that we recognise is an obligation of the state to preserve national security and stability when grave violence places the country in danger. We call for cooperation and dialogue to be prioritised while strictly respecting principles of the UN Charter, abstaining from any approach based on coercion, selectivity or politicisation of human rights. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka.
Mr. Vice President, we reiterate our principled position against country-specific initiatives, as such initiatives are confrontational, counterproductive, and undermine the spirit of cooperation required in promoting and protecting human rights. Any action to improve the human rights situation in a country should be guided by the accepted principles of mutual respect and cooperation based on the consent of the country concerned. The Human Rights Council should adhere to the guiding principles of universality, impartiality, and non-selectivity stipulated in the GA Resolution 60/251 and the IB package. We believe that any initiative adopted in this session that does not enjoy the support of the country concerned will only undermine the spirit of cooperation required in promoting and protecting human rights. Further, we note the potential program budget implications that these initiatives have, particularly at a time when the entire United Nations system is faced with an unprecedented liquidity crisis. We urge the co-sponsors to engage in a genuine and constructive dialogue with the Islamic Republic of Iran based on mutual respect and cooperation. Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mali. Thank you, Vice President. I'd like first to thank you for convening this meeting. The delegation of Mali regrets that the issue of human rights, so important that they are, be instrumentalized for political purposes and exploited in order to weaken states. The Islamic Republic of Iran, since 2010, under the control of a fact-finding mission of this Council, has seen a parallel mechanism imposed on it called a fact-finding mission. We recall in that regard that the consent of the state concerned is crucial for the success of any multilateral mechanism seeking to support governmental efforts. In terms of the events in Iran, which we're discussing, Mali reaffirms its support to the Iranian authorities with a view to restoring security throughout the country and to the Iranian population, the peace-loving, development-loving Iranian population. We condemn by principle imposition of sanctions or any other UCM. We reiterate our appeal so that issues of human rights be tackled in a framework of constructive dialogue in support to states and to populations concerned, instead of a politicized approach and that is maintained by certain states. Thank you. I give the floor now to the distinguished representative of Canada.
Mr. Vice President, Canada is horrified by reports that thousands of people in Iran, including children, have been killed and arbitrarily detained for exercising their human rights. Canada condemns in the strongest terms the Iranian authorities' use of unlawful and lethal force against protesters. Killings, forced confessions, torture, ill treatment in detention, and the denial of legal safeguards are all clear violations of international human rights law. Internet shutdowns are another form of repression and an infringement on human rights. This recurring retaliation against dissent underscores an entrenched pattern of state violence and impunity. This abhorrent cycle of violence cannot continue. Canada will continue to work with partners to hold Iran to account through forums like this and through the continued imposition of sanctions in response to violations. Canada commends the people of Iran, including the brave journalists and human rights defenders, who continue to hold their ground, call for their rights to be respected, and voice their demands in the face of violence. Canada urges Iran to immediately end violence against protesters, halt executions, release those arbitrarily detained, and uphold the human rights of its population. We fully support continued investigations of Iran's human rights violations by the Special Rapporteur and the FFM on Iran. This is integral to accountability and justice. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. That was the last of the states wishing to take the floor, so we'll now move to our list of speakers from NHRIs and NGOs. I'd now like to recognise the representative of the International Federation for Human Rights Leagues, please.
Mr. Vice President, after just over 3 years, the Council is holding another special session on the human rights situation in Iran. The recurrence reflects the gravity of the authorities' repression against the brave people of Iran, who continue to courageously demand the respect of their fundamental rights and to express their aspiration for democratic change. Estimates of those killed and injured by the authorities in response to the most recent peaceful protests are difficult to verify due to the government's imposition of a prolonged internet and communication blackout. What is certain is that an extraordinarily harsh crackdown on the streets of Tehran and many other cities across the country occurred, with thousands of civilians summarily killed and many more arbitrarily detained in just a few days during the peak of the protests. FIDH and LDDHI see the renewal of the mandates of the Special Rapporteur and the 2-year extension of the fact-finding mission as being essential to guarantee future accountability. Members of the Council should demand that Iranian authorities stop terrorizing the civilian population and support the work of independent international accountability mechanisms. We reiterate our call for the immediate and unconditional release of all people detained in connection with the protests, as well as all activists and human rights defenders, including Nobel Peace Prize laureate Narges Mohammadi. We also urge the government to refrain from imposing or carrying out the death penalty, particularly against those charged in connection with the demonstrations. I thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. I now recognise the representative of Ensemble contre la peine de mort.
Mr. President, in 2025, the Islamic Republic of Iran executed at least 1,500 people, the highest number in more than 3 decades. The majority were charged with offences that do not meet the threshold of the most serious crimes under international law and were sentenced without due process on the basis of forced confessions. The purpose of the widespread use of the death penalty was clear: to spread fear and prevent protests. This strategy failed. Despite the gallows, Iranians took to the streets to demand freedom and dignity. The authorities shut down the internet and launched a deadly crackdown at an unprecedented scale. Thousands of protesters were killed using live ammunition, including military-grade machine guns. All available evidence indicate that this was a systematic and widespread use of lethal force with the intent to kill as many protesters as possible. ECPM and Iran Human Rights are extremely concerned that the authorities are preparing to continue this mass killing inside the prisons, using the death penalty after summary trials and fabricated charges against protesters. Crimes against humanity have already been committed against people in Iran. The international community has a clear responsibility to protect the right to life of Iranians, hold perpetrators accountable, and ensure that UN mechanisms conduct an independent investigation inside Iran. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. I now recognise United Nations Watch.
Mr. President, doctors in Iran estimate 20,000 protesters killed and 330,000 injured. These are numbers that defy comprehension. These are crimes against humanity. So today's session is welcome, but let's be honest, it is too little and too late. The Iranian people have a right to know why for over 3 weeks did this council say nothing. We asked the 87 UN rights experts, the world's early warning mechanism, for over 2 weeks, why were you silent? Only on January 13th was there a statement, and out of 87 experts, only 5 of you signed it. Day after day, we pleaded for action. 5 days into the repression, after killings of protesters, I asked Agnes Kalamard, the former UN rapporteur who now heads Amnesty International, why are you silent? In January 2020, when the US eliminated IRGC terror chief Qasem Soleimani, she rushed within hours to condemn it. Why no urgency when innocent Iranian protesters are massacred? And beyond this room, we ask the media, Hollywood celebrities, campus protesters, those who know how to mobilize world opinion, why are you silent? The answer is uncomfortable but clear. The Iran protest movement shatters a cherished narrative. A people rising against Islamist tyranny does not fit the ideology, and so it is ignored. To all of you, we say the cost of your silence was Iranian lives. It is time to choose. Do everything to protect the people of Iran or your failed worldview. History is watching.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. Human Rights Watch, please.
Mr. Vice President, Human Rights Watch delivers this statement at a devastating time for people in Iran, when security forces have carried out unprecedented mass killings of thousands of protesters and bystanders. Witnesses have described streets being drenched in blood. They have told us that whoever they speak to these days knows someone who is being killed or injured. The scale of atrocities is staggering. We urge this Council to recognize that impunity only enables further bloodshed. These massacres, harrowing images of families searching for their loved ones among piles of body bags, should shock the conscience of the world. This Council has a vital role to play in putting human rights and accountability at the heart of the international response. Independent investigations are crucial to establish the truth and pave the way for accountability and criminal justice in line with international law. Member States should renew the mandates of the Special Rapporteur and the fact-finding mission, ensuring the mission has adequate resources to investigate this latest wave of atrocities and collect and preserve evidence to facilitate future judicial proceedings. This is no time to sit on the fence. You and Member States should set aside double standards and stand with victims and survivors of these egregious crimes and those who continue to demand respect for their human rights, not those seeking to cover up atrocities while cutting off the entire population from the rest of the world. I thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you very much. Amnesty International, please.
People in Iran are reeling from trauma of unprecedented massacres. Authorities maintain an internet shutdown to hide their crimes, yet here they deny the truth. Let's be clear about the facts confirmed by eyewitnesses and verified videos. Iranian security forces fired into crowds, unlawfully killing thousands and injuring many more. Victims authorities shamelessly describe as terrorists were people demanding human rights and democracy, students, workers, teachers, medical workers, hoping for a brighter future. Today, crushed hopes lie in body bags, in overflowing morgues. What authorities call stability is a state of terror involving armed patrols and curfews. Systemic impunity for repeated protest bloodshed in 2017, 2019, and 2022 for the crimes against humanity documented by the fact-finding mission has emboldened authorities now in 2026 to escalate their policy of mass killings to silence dissent. To look away from these atrocities is not constructive dialogue. It is an abdication of responsibility. We urge Member States to support the resolution and recognize that without an ICC referral and international justice mechanism, bloodshed will only intensify. History will not forgive your inaction.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you very much. Association of Iranian Short-Statured Adults has the floor.
Mr. President, recent events in Iran must be addressed with honesty and balance. For the United States and Israel, Iran has never been a human rights concern. Rather than improving the situation in Iran, these interventions simply impose anxiety and psychological pressure on Iranians. Our observations show that the protests began peacefully and many people were simply expressing social and economic complaints. This changed when organized violence entered the streets. Armed groups carried out brutal attacks, setting fire, destroying public space, and killing both civilians and security personnel. Media reports and eyewitnesses have pointed to the presence of trained individuals operating among the crowds, some armed, others coordinating acts of sabotage and violence. Video evidence shows firearms being used indiscriminately, turning peacefully gathering into sense of cause and fear. Such action cannot be described as a protest. They represent foreign interference and organized violence which undermine the safety of ordinary people. We urge the international community to reject violence, defend peaceful expression, and support dialogue among the Iranians without external pressure or manipulation. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. Another video now from the Association for Defending Victims of Terrorism.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished representatives, while condemning the violence of January 2026 in Iran and expressing sympathy for the victims, we emphasize that what occurred on 8th and 9th of January was not a popular protest, but rather an organized and armed violence by terrorist groups and agents of intelligence services, with the support and apparent intervention of foreign states, especially the United States and Israel. The evidence can be seen in the statements and posts of foreign officials on social media, as well as the declaration of the leaders of the terrorist group of MEK that their members were present in these unrests, and that 30 of them were killed. According to available documents, the actions of these groups have resulted in the deaths and injuries of more than 2,427 citizens and security forces in a few days, and have led to inhuman atrocities such as burning people alive, beheadings, killing of children, including 3-year-old Melina Asadi and 8-year-old Anila Talibi, and the widespread destruction and burning of public and private property. No doubt, any support for these actions is considered support for terrorism. We call on the Human Rights Council to condemn such acts and foreign support and to oblige states to stop international violating behaviors and provide guarantees of non-recurrence and compensate for the damages caused. Thank you.
A continuación.
We will now hear another video from PAR's non-trading development activist company.
Mr. President, at the outset, we wish to express our deepest sympathy to all citizens affected and harmed during the unrest of January 2026 in the Islamic Republic of Iran. The life, safety, and dignity of every civilian must be respected, and no one should suffer as a result of violence or instability. We address this Council with the gravest concern regarding the organized violence, terrorist attacks, and blatant foreign interference that accompanied these recent events. External interventions, whether through political, media, or logistical support to violent and terrorist groups, constitute a direct attack on Iran's sovereignty and a clear violation of the United Nations Charter. We call upon the HRC to unequivocally condemn all foreign interference and support for organized violence, affirm the right of the people to peaceful and lawful protest, hold accountable any actors seeking to destabilize Iran under the pretext of human rights or political freedom, national sovereignty, civilian security, and the right to lawful civil expression are non-negotiable principles and fundamental pillars of human rights, and no pretext can legitimize foreign interference or acts of violence. I thank you.
The next speaker is the representative of Iranian Human Rights Documentation Center.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. On January 8 and 9, 2026, millions of Iranians took to the streets to voice their demand for freedom and a government that respects their basic rights. They were met with gunfire. Thousands have been killed. Many more have been blinded or sustained other grave injuries. Thousands have also been detained and are being subjected to torture as we speak. The full scope of what has happened will not be known for months. A little over 3 years ago, this Council held a special session to address the Iranian government's grave human rights abuses committed in the course of the Woman Life Freedom protests. Despite the creation of the independent international fact-finding mission on Iran, the human rights situation in the country has significantly deteriorated. Given the internet shutdown that the Iranian government has imposed on the country, the international community must take swift action to stop further atrocities under this information blackout. The Iran Human Rights Documentation Center joins the call for the renewal of the mandate of the FFMI and urges that the mission is provided the resources it needs to carry out its duties. We also call on the international community to exert diplomatic pressure on the Iranian government to immediately halt the gross human rights abuses taking place in the country. The Iranian people have suffered tremendously. The international community must act now. Thank you.
Gracias. Tiene la palabra.
Thank you very much. I now pass the floor to the Institute for Protection of Women's Rights.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Monsieur le Vice-Président, l'Institut pour la protection.
Vice President, the Institute for Women's Rights would like to call the Council's attention to the terrible events which are taking place in Iran, through which the fundamental rights of citizens have been gravely violated by terrorist acts. In January 2026, protests by certain professional bodies begun by legitimate financial and economic claims have been derailed and deliberately distorted into violent events which have been sown through by terrorist groups. There have been hybrid campaigns, both digital and on the ground, in order to derail these. There have been firefighters, banks, mosques and private property owners that have been caught up in this. Members, distinguished delegates, as a representative of Iranian civil society, we would like to respectfully call on member states to found their positions on reliable, impartial and credible sources, and to clearly distinguish between peaceful protests and terrorist acts, and to condemn all forms of extremist violence which are being carried out against the lives and property of Iranian people by terrorists and mercenaries. We would like to ask for the explicit condemnation of all interference in the domestic affairs of Iran and all threats against the rights of the Iranian people to self-determination. Thank you. Thank you. We will now hear another video from the coordination of Association des Particuliers pour la Liberté de Conscience.
We are deeply concerned about the deteriorating human rights situation in Iran, particularly regarding religious freedom and the persecution of religious minorities. Following recent demonstrations, Iran has unleashed violent repression. Witnesses report over 12,000 deaths, with telecommunication blocked to silence testimony. Victims include teenagers shot in the street and hospitals overwhelmed with casualties. Religious minorities face systematic persecution. The Ministry of Intelligence arrested over 50 Christians on fabricated espionage charges. 8 Baha'i women received nearly 39-year imprisonment merely for promoting their faith. 35 Jewish citizens were arrested for alleged ties to Israel based solely on decades-old travel or social media activity. The coordinated crackdown constitutes crimes against humanity under international law. We urge the Council to establish accountability mechanisms and take concrete action. We remain committed to supporting these persecuted communities. I thank you.
We will now hear from Yamach Karen Tebsonati Vasalamat Iranian on video, please.
President, we stand firmly in defense of the right to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression. At the same time, we reject any attempt to erase the line between legitimate civil discourse and foreign instigated violence and terror. As confirmed by high-ranking officials from the United States and Israel, recent events were deliberately manipulated to transform peaceful protest into armed insurgency. After failing to defeat Iranian nation through external aggression, these actors shifted to a strategy of internal destabilization. Separatist groups supported by foreign intelligence used military weapons to kill civilians and police without distinction. These terrorists deliberately burned public and private property, seeking to undermine national morale and spread chaos. Foreign interference and the support of external media outlets have never served the interests of the Iranian people. On the contrary, such actions only heighten tensions, generate widespread anxiety, and undermine the psychological well-being of society. We urge the Council to end its double standards. How can the defenders be judged, while those who planned, armed, and enabled this violence remain ignored? We urge the Council to conduct a comprehensive investigation, including into the responsibility of foreign states that arm and finance terrorists in violation of the fundamental human rights of the Iranian people. I thank you.
We will now hear another video from Mavaran Hamyari.
Dear President, Excellencies, I speak on behalf of Chatra to condemn the organized violence that resulted in the deprivation of the Iranian people's right to peaceful protest, legitimate civic demands, arising from economic pressures caused by unilateral sanctions, and the reactivation of the snapback mechanism were distorted by the entry of organized terrorist groups, transforming civic space into an environment of insecurity and human loss. In this context, alongside the loss of human life, the right to peaceful assembly, protected under both domestic and international law, was seriously undermined. While violence, incitement, and terrorist acts are never protected under human rights law, they condemn the loss of life among ordinary civilians and among those responsible for maintaining public safety as a result of terrorist violence, and emphasize that human rights are indivisible and that the right to life applies to all. In closing, international and civil society institutions are expected in their assessments to maintain a clear and principled distinction between legitimate peaceful protest and organized violence. Human rights are not strengthened through reports that lack sufficient evidentiary basis or meaningful connection to social realities, and the protection of human rights require avoiding their instrumentalizations. I thank you.
Escucharemos ahora otro vídeo.
We will now hear another video from Article 19, the International Centre Against Censorship.
As this council meets for a special session, the people of Iran remain in darkness under a near-total communications blackout, deliberately imposed by the regime to conceal a massacre of its own people. Article 19 urges the international community to take urgent measures to ensure accountability for repeated crimes under international law. We deplore the lethal repression of this new wave of protests, with tens of thousands of people killed or imprisoned by the authorities simply for protesting. We are horrified by reports of security forces raiding overwhelmed hospitals, beating patients, their families and medical personnel, while attempting to arrest the injured protesters and seize bodies of those killed. The regime's policy of mass detention has been facilitated by broadcasting coerced statements from detained protesters on social media. We express our full support for the fact-finding mission on Iran to carry out an urgent inquiry into these international crimes, to collect and preserve evidence for use in legal proceedings, and call for all resources necessary to be allocated to the mandate to carry out its investigations. We urge states to put urgent diplomatic pressure on the Iranian authorities to stop the bloodshed and restore access to the internet. In light of the systemic impunity, we urge states to initiate investigations under the principle of universal jurisdiction to hold those responsible to account. Finally, we call on all states and private companies that use satellite internet connections to use all avenues to find a permanent and sustainable solution to help maintain connectivity. This includes strict export bans on military-grade jamming technology to Iran to break the regime's communications blackout. Thank you.
Okay, so now we will hear from the representative of Civicus World Alliance for Citizen Participation.
Mr. Vice President, Civicus and volunteer activists express grave concern over the rapidly deteriorating human rights situation in Iran following the brutal repression of nationwide protests that began in late December. Iranian authorities responded with an extreme and violent crackdown on peaceful demonstrations that quickly expanded into calls for political reform. Furthermore, security forces reportedly used overwhelming and lethal force against protesters, including military-grade weapons. Reliable accounts describe wounded individuals executed in the streets and cities placed under de facto martial law amid unprecedented wave of arbitrary arrests and mass unlawful killings. Sources report over 3,000 deaths according to the authorities alone and over 24,000 arrests, whilst a nationwide internet and telecommunications blackout in breach of international human rights law further obstructs life-saving information, documentation and accountability. Senior officials openly threaten protesters with maximum punishment and no legal leniency, signaling further risk of torture, enforced disappearances and grossly unfair trials. We are particularly concerned that detainees are at grave risk of arbitrary executions. We urge this Council to strengthen monitoring of Iran, ensure the renewal and adequate resourcing of the Special Rapporteur and the FFM to carry out an urgent inquiry and support criminal accountability for grave violations. There is also an urgent need for the voice of civil society within Iran to be heard directly. The people of Iran urgently need protection, justice and international solidarity. We thank you.
Thank you very much. I now pass the floor to Baha'i International Community representative.
Mr. Vice President, Iranians deserve the right to play a decisive role in the future of their country. These weeks we have seen youth whose aspirations were long ignored by their government prepared to make many sacrifices for the upliftment of their nation, and their voices have carried across the world. Iran, once the birthplace of human rights,
has for 4 decades seen its leaders stamp on its noble heritage. As we watched with shock and grief the loss of life in the country, we witnessed an undeniable truth, that repression can never destroy what's in a person's heart. It cannot crush one's innermost beliefs and desires and longing for a better life, for human dignity. The Baha'is in Iran have endured this persecution for 4 decades, responding to cruel injustice with nothing but resilience and service to their country. Today, they grieve not only for themselves, but for their fellow Iranians, as that repression is now inflicted on so many. Mr. President, the UN was founded on a simple promise, that as one human family, we will ensure the well-being of all. Upholding justice in the face of repression is the one power that can translate humanity's ideals into reality. Today, this body has a responsibility to hold Iran's leaders accountable, to demand an end to these violations, and to urge them to uphold their sacred responsibility to protect their people. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. We're now going to have another video from the Organization for Defending Victims of Violence.
Recent weeks, protests in Iran began peacefully among some people and business owners, driven by economic hardship and currency instability from sanctions, but quickly escalated into organized violence and terrorist acts, with US and Israeli officials acknowledging intelligence involvement and destabilization efforts. Our society is under the threat of terrorism. The recent unrest, followed by more violent incidents, has caused deep trauma and distress among people. I have a few questions for this council. Why do many Western states remain silent about foreign interference and the financial and logistical support provided to violent mercenaries? Why is there so little concern expressed about the killing of innocent civilians and children by organized terrorist groups? Why does the international community avert its gaze from the destruction of people's property and the creation of insecurity through external intervention? Is setting hospitals and public buildings on fire a form of peaceful protest? And when such acts are openly supported from abroad, does international law still call this peaceful? Why not allow societies to find their own? We urge the fact-finding mission and the special rapporteur on Iran to employ evidence-based language and avoid characterizing these events as peaceful when the documented conduct includes vandalism, arson, and terrorist acts. Thank you.
We'll now have the representative of Alliance Internationale pour la Défense des Droits et des Libertés.
Mr. President, on behalf of the International Alliance for Rights and Freedoms, IDLE, and the IDLE International Foundation for Dialogue and Peace, we express our strongest condemnation of the violent and systemic repression carried out by the authorities in the Islamic Republic of Iran against civilians. Credible UN reporting points to unlawful killings and the use of lethal force against peaceful protesters, mass arrests, incognito detention, enforced disappearances, torture, and ill treatment, alongside an escalating risk of the death penalty being misused for political purposes. We further stress that the nationwide shutdown of internet and communications since the evening of 8 January 2026 is not an administrative measure but a tool of repression designated to conceal violations and obstruct documentation and evidence preservation as warned by the UN fact-finding mission and the UN experts who have called for this immediate end. The Human Rights Council does not need expression of concern today. It needs a deterrent decision grounded in international human rights law, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, and the Convention Against Torture, requiring the protection of the rights to the life. The absolute prohibition of torture, the ban on arbitrary detention, guarantees of fair trial rights, and the protection of freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. We thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Maloka International.
Gracias, Vicepresidente.
Thank you, Vice President. This special session reflects once more the increasing politicization of the Council. We're witnessing selective use of human rights as an instrument of geopolitical pressure. Iran is a state subject to the United Nations Charter, an instrument which embodies non-interference in internal affairs and the principle of sovereign equality of states. selectively invoking violations without taking into account external threats is a distortion of this legal framework. In recent weeks, Iran has faced violent acts on its territory channeled by terrorist cells and interference by foreign intelligence services, seeking to create an escalation of external forces that cannot be ignored. Washington's actions, including explicit military threats, reflect a neo-colonial policy using human rights as justification for their strategic objectives in the region. The same methods of coercion struck Latin America and Greenland. They reflect a global pattern of geopolitical aggression which merits equal scrutiny on the part of this body. We recommend, therefore, Vice President, to this Council to protect peace, respect the right to self-determination and demand the lifting of unilateral coercive measures from the Iranian people and all peoples who suffer the consequences of structural violence of a system which governs us today. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Institute of Human Rights. Not in the room, I believe. Therefore, next up is International Rehabilitation Council for Torture Victims.
Mr. Vice President, the IRCT, together with the OMCT, Omega Research